Good afternoon and welcome to Klingspor's Woodworking Shop 21st Woodworking Extravaganza Virtual Edition. I'm Mike Z.
I'm Chris, and I'm proud you got all that out in one take, Mike.
Thank you so much. And joined with us is Nick. He is from the technical department of Klingspor Abrasives United States. Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, kind of like Chris. If I could tell a little story real quick, I remember this young guy walked into a cabinet shop I was working in, fresh out of high school, had a full head of black curly hair, and he's sitting beside me. This is a few years later.
He was skinny back then too, wasn't he?
Back then too. And
Lord.
actually, I had hair at the same time, so hair today, gone tomorrow. But yeah, I work at Klingspor Abrasives Incorporated, and in the technical department, and kind of like the woodworking shop, my focus is in the wood markets.
So we're sanding, we're looking at cutting, router bits, things like this. And Mike and I actually help teach some of our sales reps that come through the system and some of the things you're going to see today. So it's great to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you for joining us.
We're looking forward to what's going to come of this.
Absolutely. So give us a little backstory to Klingspor Abrasives as far as how did it begin, how long they've been around for, how big of a company is it?
Klingspor has only been around for about 127 years.
Only? Okay.
That's all. That's all. Yeah, they started it out as a glue factory. And within a short period of time, they migrated over to the coated abrasives. Kind of a natural marriage, I guess you would say, because of the adhesives that are used in the making of abrasives. But they started spread out throughout the world. I don't even know how many countries we're in today, but I do know it's a lot. There's like 20 some, maybe even 30 countries. And Klingspor has been around a long time. They're well known throughout the industry for having great products. And we manufacture them right over here in Hickory, North Carolina.
Very cool.
Yeah, I guess because they don't plaster their name all over race cars, most people don't recognize the name. But you go to Europe, especially in the wood and metal industry, people know the name Klingspor.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
They know us for quality, not race car sponsorships.
Mm-hmm.
Very good product.
Yep.
Well, very good. So we figured today we just talk about Abrasives 101. Just get to know Klingspor Abrasives, some of our core products that we have here at the woodworking shop, and just kind of get an idea of maybe what's going to be best for your application. Because while we have a lot of abrasives, there isn't a best abrasive for everything. Each one is actually engineered, designed, R&D'd into a specific field or function. Some of them do crossover, wood and metal, things along those lines, but not every single one is going to be great for every application.
Yeah. So, if you're like me, for years, I thought sandpaper was sandpaper. And you begin to realize that there are more versions of sandpaper or coated abrasives out there to better fit the application than just running down and picking up the first thing you see.
That's right. And also not every grit is the same.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll cover that today. So what we decided to do is give you kind of a, Nick had talked about how him and I are kind of the corporate trainers, if you will, for a lot of the sales reps with Klingspor Abrasives. So we kind of, this is one of our presentations that we have, and we thought it would be good for everybody to kind of take a look at and get an idea of, not only internally what we teach everybody when they're trying to learn about abrasives, but also just the amount of knowledge that's in this. So first, I'll start here for you, Nick, and then I'll let you take over. We'll kind of do what we normally do in training. But so we're going to start with, you have open coat, semi-open coat, and closed coats. And I hear the misconception a lot that an open coat is actually, a cheaper product because there's only 50% coverage or there's not as much grain on the surface. But really, this has a point to it. Open coat has open areas and is great for softwood applications, anything that's going to be almost gummy to where it's going to load. And what loading is when whatever you're abrading sticks to the surface of the abrasive. So in this case here, softwoods are great because you actually have a place for loading to occur without actually glazing over the grains. Closed coat down at the bottom is really meant more for hardwood, something that's not going to load. It's going to turn to dust when it's abraded. And a closed coat is 100% grain coverage. So therefore, every part of that disc, sheet, belt will be 100% covered in grain. There's not going to be any open areas. If you use a closed coat on softwood, it's going to load very quickly because there is no areas for loading to occur. Now, most of your disc material on the market, especially in Klingspor abrasives, is going to be what's called semi-open coat, and that is a 70% roughly hit or miss, 50 to 75% grain coverage, which gives you a little bit of best of both worlds. Reason why it's in disc form is because you're not doing a lot of straight line sanding most of the time with discs. It's more like an orbital pattern or a round circles type of application. And so therefore you get various applications between both hardwood and softwood.
Yeah, and just like Sedge was talking about this morning, as far as his demonstration on the random orbital sander, I mean, you can see, it's not, like Mike said, not going to be a straight line application. So the reason we bring this out is because there are lots of resins and oils in softwood. We've got softwoods, we've got hardwoods. The resins and the oils in softwood have a big time tendency to begin to load that abrasive. Okay, so that open coat is going to give more room for that abrasive to load, but in a lot of instances, that stuff will begin to get heavy and it'll flake off and open that grain back up. So, these resins and oils, a lot of times, especially in pine, when you're dealing with pine, this stuff has been baked in basically. And as you begin the abrading process, as you start sanding, it heats that stuff up a little bit, loosens it up, and it becomes a whole lot more gummy and sticky. And then you begin to see your abrasive start to load.
And so in talking about that, you also have man-made materials, which is particle board, OSB, MDF, plywood. And what's really important to these, other than they are, natural woods that are kind of left over in the process, if you will, that have been applied with glue and then pressed into a board. Plywood is the specific one we want to look at here, because a lot of plywood manufacturers, when they do abrasives into it, they typically wide belt the plywood out the line, and they usually use around a 120 grit. So if you're someone who is getting plywood and you want to sand it and you're starting at 80 grit, you're actually making more work for yourself and going backwards in the process. So knowing that most of them start at about 120, you can actually start a little finer, like a 150 or 180, and cut a lot of time out of the process and not make sanding such a chore.
So looking at that medium density fiberboard, Chris, when you're using MDF and you're sanding those edges, what's your process on those edges?
I typically do the edges a little finer than I do the surface, just because it seems like it's more spongy on the edges. But either way, usually I try to make sure I've got that sealed off real well before I do anything else.
Absolutely.
Tell you what, Chris, you want to take this next one?
Sure. So typical makeup of an abrasive is three things. One, you've got your grain. The most common you'll see in woodworking applications is aluminum oxide, occasionally silicon carbide, especially in the finishing side of things. You can also look at the Alumina Zirconia for the real aggressive, heavy leveling applications. Ceramic typically doesn't find its way in the woodworking market unless it's blended with the aluminum oxide more so than the ceramic, just typically because ceramic requires so much pressure to break the grain down. Otherwise, it's just going to glaze over and load, and you'll never truly get the full use out of it. So those are the main grains you're going to be seeing in the abrasive side. Now, those will be applied to a backing. Typically, that's going to be paper, cloth, film, latex. So there's a variety of backing options. Most of the time for woodworking, you're looking at paper for your discs and things like that. Cloth, you'll see that in a lot of your belts, whether that be your edge belt, stroke belt, or your long, maybe some of your wide belt machines. And then film. Film is very flat, very thin. So for your finish side, paper and film are your products of choice. The cloth, of course, is going to be more for your aggressive and heavy removal applications. And then finally, how is it bonded to that backing? Typically resin or glue. Glue was the main method used way back in the day. There are still a couple of products that still use glue, but most everything now is resin bonded, just simply because it holds up better to the heat, and it's also more durable and offers a little longer life on the actual abrasive without the grain flaking off the material.
Thank you for that. So we'll start out with aluminum oxide.
Aluminum oxide is going to be one of your most universal grains. The reason for that is this grain can basically handle just about any process that you're into. So if you look at the aluminum oxide here, Of course, it's universal. It's extremely tough. That is a very, very tough grain right there. Works great for sanding wood and leather. A lot of times you can look at the coated abrasive itself, whether it be in disc form or whatever the case may be, and you can tell it's an aluminum oxide by the reddish brown color. Okay. And the grit range is just completely outstanding. I mean, we're talking 16 all the way up to 2000. That's pretty extreme right there. But the cool thing about aluminum oxide is as you're using it, it slowly rounds off. So you stop and think about it. Like Mike likes to use the illustration of a number 2 pencil. Stop and think about a number 2 pencil. You start using that thing and it slowly starts rounding off. Okay. Well, that's what aluminum oxide does. Slowly rounds off. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean it sands finer as you go? No, it doesn't really sand any more fine. If you started out with 120 grit grain, it's still going to be 120 grit grain, but it's going to get less aggressive.
Yep. And actually, Chris is the one that taught me the number 2 pencil trick, because it makes a lot of sense when you're trying to explain to someone who has no idea about abrasives, never seen them before, but everyone kind of has the idea about number 2 pencil. So nope, that was all Chris on that one. But yeah, no, that's a great point, because we have a lot of people on our side of things that would say that, hey, I use this 120, and then as I sand with it, it gets finer. So I'm using it now as a 180, and it's like, it's not actually, it hasn't changed any. It's more of not as aggressive as it was when it first started out. So it's still 120 grit grain as far as your scratch goes, but it's just not as aggressive as it was. So the mentality of that it actually switches back to like a 180 or gets finer doesn't actually apply with aluminum oxide. And kind of aluminum oxide is that reddish brown color that you see. You will also see it in a very pale white. That's also another type of aluminum oxide, but most commonly it's red. You want to take this one, Chris?
Sure. Okay. Silicon carbide, on the other hand, is the most hard abrasive grain next to diamond that you'll run across. The good thing is it stays very, very sharp. So no matter what level of use you'll find in the silicon carbide, it's going to remain that sharpness throughout the life. So you're going to get to the backing of the material before. That's how you know that you've actually used that up. And what goes through a process called friability, meaning that it will break off and expose new sharp grain. So that's what makes it throughout the life of the material just can maintain that sharpness and consistency. That's where you really shine, especially in finishing and in some other applications where you need that consistent scratch or that consistent sharpness so that you maintain that level of integrity. And that's where silicon carbide is going to really help in those markets. The nice thing about that is it too is available in a huge range from 12 to 2000. A lot of the people know the silicon carbide grain as your wet dry paper. Automotive market uses this quite a bit because they can wet sand their material very easily. Well, not everything is waterproof in the silicon carbide world, so you do need to pay attention to that part of it. But it is a very good grain because of its sharpness and fracturing capabilities.
Interesting little tidbit on the silicon carbide that I read recently is that during the manufacturing process of the actual grains themselves, they develop stress fractures from the heat and the pressure that it takes. And that's where the friability comes in. It breaks along those stress fractures.
What was one of the very first products that Klingspor Abrasives made? Do you know?
I'm not sure on that one.
Silicon carbide.
Is it really?
Yep. 1920, actually, in the plant. You can see where they had it on the auto paper.
Oh, yeah.
And wet dry for the automotive industry. That was one of the very big markets that they got into. Yep. Fun facts. But if you're doing anything where you have to have that consistent scratch, and that was one of the key features with silicon carbide, is that consistent scratch. So if you're starting out on one side of a table and trying to sand to the other side with light pressure, it slices through your finish rather than kind of plows it out like an ice cream scoop. What silicon carbide does is like little knives that just kind of slice and give you a very accurate, consistent scratch across the whole surface. And then that friability giving you a consistent sharp edge as it breaks down. So therefore you have the same scratch from left to right if you're sanding something like that. Drawers, doors, something where it's a larger surface and you don't want to keep changing out sandpaper, then this is a good product to look at, especially in between coats of finish.
Yeah, the main difference is with silicon carbide, it kind of stores the finish, whereas aluminum oxide sort of plows into
Hmm.
the material.
Yep. So your analogy was always good of icicles.
Mhm.
Silicon carbide is like icicles, and I kind of like aluminum oxide acts like an ice cream scoop. So it kind of plows through, but it's kind of a wide gap. So if you're sanding finishes, if you know finishes will shrink as they cure out, as they off gas. And if you use aluminum oxide, you can actually see the gouge scratch that's left in the finish versus silicon carbide is a very narrow kind of scoring, like Chris said, type of scratch that fills in much faster and more level.
And that's why you get a much better finishing scratch from it.
Absolutely. So most of the time it's very dark in color, black, unless it is coated with a stearate, which we will get to in a moment. So I enjoy aluminum zirconia because I like to compare it to the fact that if aluminum oxide took silicon carbide out to dinner and 9 months later they decided to have an abrasive baby, you have aluminum zirconia. And what it is it's tough and aggressive. So that's kind of giving you that aluminum oxide side of it, but it's friable one time, which means that it will break off and expose fresh scratching grain again. It's usually blue, grayish blue in color. But we really recommend aluminum zirconia for your heavy removal, stock removal applications, belts, wide belts. If you're planing or dimensioning wood, this is when it really kicks into play because it's not a very clean finishing scratch. When we say here that it has no finishing properties, what we mean is that the scratch is so aggressive that you really don't want to try to finish with it. You want to switch over to an aluminum oxide. I typically will recommend this for your 80 grits up to maybe 100, and then switch over on bare wood if you're planning on staining especially, or adding any kind of dye, any kind of colorants to your project. Then you want to switch over to an aluminum oxide because that scratch will leave what's called swirl marks. And a lot of people blame it on the sandpaper, but really it could be the type of sandpaper that you're using or the type of grain that's on that sandpaper to cause those swirl marks. So aluminum zirconia for me, I mean, you guys can have, everyone's got a kind of slightly different tweak on it. But I like it 60 and 80 if I'm really getting some I want to remove some stock. I really want to level out a board or something along those lines. And then I'll switch it over to an aluminum oxide after that.
Yeah, no, Eric, this morning when he was talking about the Madison table, he's liking that PS36 material. Well, what makes that a little different than just straight up aluminum zirconia is that is an aluminum zirconia aluminum oxide blend product. So you kind of get some of the best of both worlds. But even at that, it does stop at 220. But I'm like you, I typically recommend not going much higher than 100 or 120 with that. But obviously, as soon as you're done with that step, you never end with it. You end with an aluminum oxide product. And I think maybe what's helping him out with his finish on that is he is ending out with an aluminum oxide 320. So that's probably what's giving him some saving grace without having any surface flaws.
Yep. And Cherry's got those bees wings in the grain that kind of hide swirl marks. So a lot of people won't see it in that. But if you've got maple, poplar, pine, those will really show up as far as swirl mark goes. Cherry kind of hides that. Walnut does a good job, and oak do a good job due to their grain structure. But yeah, aluminum zirconia. The other thing with our AZ Plus is that it is stearated, which we will get to in just a second as far as what that means. But that's also another added benefit to our AZ Plus, and that's why it's called aluminum zirconia Plus, is because of that stearate. And so it's typically a dark blue color. Nick, I know how much you enjoy ceramic aluminum oxide.
Ceramic aluminum oxide. Yeah, we do like to recommend that when you're using ceramic that you don't use it on wood, on bare wood. The reason for that is ceramic is a very, very super tough, super hard, super sharp grain. It is friable, but under very high pressure. So if you're putting enough pressure on that with bare wood to make that friability take place, to make that happen, well, then you're digging some really deep furrows in that wood. And you might end up having to go backwards in the process trying to take care of the deep furrows you just dug into that workpiece that you're trying to finish there. Once again, ceramic a lot of times, and most of the time, is used on metal applications. You will see it a lot on stainless steel. Stuff like that. But as far as wood is concerned, we just don't like to use it a lot. Now, is that to say that some people out there don't use it on wood? Yeah, they do, and that's fine and dandy. If that's their process, they've been doing it for a period of time and they like it, good to go. But we like to recommend that it not be used on the wood. It's a very, very tough grain. And like I say, the rough grinding on the steels, stainless steels, and things like that is the best application for that, as far as I'm concerned.
Any tips on that, Chris?
I know certain manufacturers love to push their ceramic products for the wood market, and really, it's okay maybe in the coarser side, but yeah, you don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole when anything above 80 grit, because it's just destroys the wood. And unless they've got it blended very lightly in an aluminum oxide and you're calling it ceramic, I wouldn't recommend it in the wood market. It's just not good.
And a lot of times that is the case. We do see it blended quite heavily with aluminum oxide, and then they can slap the tag ceramic on there,
and they'll charge you more for it. So I would say if you want to use something aggressive in the wood market, I would look more closely at the Alumina Zirconia more so than the ceramic. You'll save money, and you'll likely get better results.
Yeah, and there's products out there that are branded as ceramic, and really, as long as there's 20% grain of ceramic on the surface, they can call it that. But if you look at it in an abrasive technical term, it's ceramic aluminum oxide, because it is a man-made product. But there's typically only about 80% aluminum oxide on that surface and 20% ceramic. So you're paying a premium from other manufacturers for that name that's really not doing much for you other than a general aluminum oxide would, except for you have a couple of different grains on there that are going to last a long time, but they're also going to become very harsh and radical when the aluminum oxide wears down. So that's one of the biggest things whenever you look at Klingspor Abrasives and you look at our technical department that we have between the woodworking shop and Abrasives USA, is that we run into these issues a lot as far as these questions go. I want the exact same thing as this manufacturer has. We don't do it that way. We don't sit and look at what someone else has and then say we're going to make the same thing. Instead, there's a lot of research and development. 127 years. There's bound to be some things that are going to change in the industry. There's bound to be some things that are going to be new and exciting that may not last a long time. So this one we always hit on because we get this question a lot as far as I want a ceramic for my application. I don't see one on your website. That's because we don't recommend it for wood. We'll make it in belts. We got it all day for belts. But that's mostly for metal grinding industry, for the knife making industry, stuff like that, where you have to get a lot of steel ground down to a certain shape. So I want to make sure everyone kind of understands as far as why you don't see a lot of ceramic on our website for bare wood in just random discs. Let's see what else we got here. Yeah. And so with this surface here, you can hopefully you can see it at home, but what you're looking for is that typically on a true ceramic, you're going to have like these white peaks that come through the seal coat on top. And we'll talk about what that is in a minute. But what that is showing you the grain protrusion and the real aggressive nature of this product. Who wants to take abrasive backings?
Chris.
Nice job, Nick. Oh.
Yeah, we kind of hit on some of this earlier. There's a variety of backing options, and we talked about a couple of them: paper, cloth, and film. In the woodworking market, typically don't get into this one much, but it is there for, especially for a lot of the aggressive coarse disc operations, and that's a Fiberback. And essentially, you think about fiber, it's kind of done the same with plywood is. You have a layer this way that's running one direction, and then you'll have another layer of material running the opposite direction, and it just continues to build until it builds up a very heavy fiber backing, and then the grain is applied. And so, you won't see it much, but it is there for aggressive, heavy removal applications. And you'll be noticed a lot of the paper is labeled anywhere from A to F, and A being the thinnest, F being the heaviest or the thickest. And obviously you're going to use A and B more in your finished applications. D and F are going to be more inclined to be used in your more aggressive applications. And so you'll notice when you look at the backing of the material, you can kind of tell sort of what you're getting into there. The cloth, it's going to go anywhere from the JF or the really super flexible J-Flex material all the way to Z. Really, we only offer, Klingspor only offers one product that's a Z weight, and that's a very heavy duty belt. But for the most cases, The JF, the GF, the XF, J, those are going to be more for your flexible materials like your flexible knife belts or your pump sleeves, things like that. Then you start getting into your X and your Y blends. Those are going to be more for like your wide belt machines or your stroke sanding belts, edge belts, things along those lines. You want those to be much heavier because they have to endure a lot more aggressiveness and pressure and sharp edges. Then you get into the film. Currently, Klingspor offers a 3 mil thick polyester film. This is a very good product, especially for wet sanding. It is a waterproof product, which makes it very nice for doing a variety of things. Currently, only available in an aluminum oxide product, but that film does give you a lot of flexibility and very, very good edge wear.
And it's interesting as we look at this too, you know, for years we've heard the term and all use of the term sandpaper. But this just kind of highlights the fact that not all sandpaper is created equal, because some of them are paper, some of them are cloth, some of them are film. And the fiber actually is chemically impregnated paper. So we come right back around full circle.
Yep.
And that's why it's when we say what kind of abrasives do you need, it's not just what kind of sandpaper you need.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, and this is definitely not meant to confuse you. The number one question we get is, you know, I'm looking for the best for woodworking or the best for metalworking. And being on the technical side of it, Chris and I always have the same question: what is your application? Because not everyone is doing the same thing. So therefore, we want to make sure that this isn't to confuse you, but to know that there's a lot of different things out there available from Klingspor Abrasives to help suit whatever your application is.
Yeah, when you come to us, a lot of folks come to us, maybe have never even heard of Klingspor Abrasives for the reasons we mentioned earlier, because they're used to going into the hardware store and just grabbing what's on the shelf. Your local big box isn't really set up for these more specific applications. I mean, we're a sister company to a worldwide global abrasive manufacturer. So we have access to all of the things that they make. And so here at the woodworking shop, we really want to make sure that we're dialing in and getting you the right product you need, whether it's for that ultra fine finish, whether it's epoxy sanding, or whether you're trying to surface a slab and anything in between. We've got applications to really, or products that can really dive right into your application, which that's why we want to ask all those questions. And we don't mean to do that to annoy you. We do it because we can really help get you the right product. And I think the tagline for Klingspor is give you the most sanding power for your money. That's what we want to do. We want to help you get to maximize your money and get you the right product that's going to suit you best.
And time is money. So if we can get you a process down faster than what you've already been doing, we'll definitely recommend that as well.
Yep. And there's a lot of folks that say this product is the best for everything. There is no one product that is the best for everything. There's products that might be best for a specific application. Sometimes products may cross over into other applications. But if you're looking for something aggressive, that's not the product you want for your finishing. If you're looking for something to get a super fine finish, that's not the product you want in the aggressive stuff.
Everything has its place.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about the bond, and that is the size coat and the maker coat. And so what you have here in the bond is that you have a resin. It's pretty industry standard to use a phenolic resin. That's going to give you the most durability. It's going to hold that grain tightly into place. And then glue. Chris had mentioned that glue is kind of one of the older ways of doing it. And high glue was really kind of the number one thing that they used because it was hot. You could put the grain in there. And then when it cooled, it held the grain in place. Typically, there's a few products that we have that are made for that. And usually Jeweler's Rouge is the best way I know how to put it. They're almost like our shop rolls that actually have a glue back because it gives them a softer starch, and that was available before they had foam. So as you can tell through abrasives, I mean, if we want to hang out one day and geek about abrasives, all three of us can do it. But the really cool thing is that when you have technologies that kind of shift and move, abrasives have followed with that. So with that said, the reason I bring that up is because the maker coat is what holds the grain to the backing. Okay, so there is the backing, and in this picture here, there's cloth. And then there's glue that is applied, and then the grain is electrostatically pulled into that. But the catch here and why it's over the years is the size coat. Originally, back in the day, they used to actually put like the same 80 grit grain on 3 different one. So it was 80, 100, and 120. And all they did was just add a little bit more size coat. Nowadays, it's different. They actually are specific to a size for each 80, 100, and 120 grit. But we still call it the same thing, which is a size coat. And that's what locks the grain to the maker coat. So therefore, it doesn't shed or come off of your disc or your belt while you're using it. So those are the bonds. I'll let you take this one. You know this is going.
All right. So then we're going to move on and take a look at this standard size coat. Now, as you can see, look at that red line right there. You can see that the abrasive grains basically have a resin, the size coat, that pretty much covers that entire area from the peak of one grain to the peak of another. You can see there's very little space below that line. But then if we move forward a little bit, we see a proprietary component here only from Klingspor called ACT, Advanced Coating Technology. Now, if you look at that line, look at the space between the tip of that abrasive grain and where that resin bottoms out there. There's a lot of airspace in there, a lot of space for loading, for it to handle the loading, a lot of space for airflow, for it to run cooler. There's just a lot of good space in there. That's advanced coating technology really adds a lot to this abrasive.
Now, you can't find the ACT on a lot of materials. It's specifically designed for certain materials. Our biggest one that we have is our premium belts here. CS311 is a material number, but that gives you more open area with an open coat. So remember earlier we talked about open coat, so it's 50% grain coverage. Then you have this ACT on top of that, giving you even more area for loading to occur, means that the abrasive will last longer. So it's not always about, I want the longest lasting abrasive. Sometimes it's about, what is your application? And if you're sanding something in particular, will this work the best for you?
So does that mean, since there's less resin banked up against those grains, does that mean that that grain is not going to hold on as long?
Nope, that's not true with ACT. So with ACT and this proprietary coating, the grains are going to be held into the size coat much more rigid, and therefore gives you better edge wear and overall life of the abrasive. Because remember, if we were looking at this previous one, as you're sanding through that size coat and you start to reveal those grains that are there, that you don't have a lot of wear. So your service life on the abrasive is going to be a lot less than, say, this one here, where you have a lot more grain exposure. More grain exposure gives you a more aggressive cut initially, but also gives you longer service life. And here's just kind of a conventional abrasive that doesn't have the ACT and the grain breakout, which means where the grain kind of caps off. And so you have just the size coat and the grain equal to each other. I see that a lot. The best way I know how to describe that is when you're using wet dry sandpaper and you push down too hard initially to cut, and it seems like it just starts loading up really quickly. That's grain breakout. But with ACT, you have much longer life past a standard abrasive without it.
And there's a good view of a couple of belts that you see there, one with the ACT and one without, and kind of highlights the benefits that you see listed there on the left-hand side. One of the benefits being less loading. And of course, it's an open coat, going to have the longer life and the higher stock removal. But there's a lot of different applications for this ACT to jump in there and do its thing. All types of wood, the composite materials, plastics, and you even see it a lot in metalworking with some of the ceramics.
Yeah, I was gonna say a lot of our ceramics have ACT, so you have a much higher grain presentation for more aggressive sanding action. Yep, abrading action. Let's get technical here. Well, stair rates. So a lot of our stair rates that we have an extra W at the end in our material name. So we have PS73, VP73, and what you'll notice on the back of the disc is you may have the W. What the W means is that those have an extra stair rate coating. I would say about 90% of the abrasives out there are coated over top with a stair rate, or they don't have a stair rate at all. So it's one or the other. But there is a lot of the stair rates that we have are going to have this on there. And what that means is that as you're sanding with it, this cascading white powder is going to shed eventually, because it is just a top coat. It's right on top. It's not glued in or anything. And what that does is it inhibits loading. So where if you have a lubricant in metalworking and you're doing anything with metal, you want to lubricate to keep the heat down. In woodworking, you want a stair rate to help combat loading. So again, doing soft woods, And if you have the stearate on top, you're going to actually give yourself a little bit more life of the disc because you have the stearate. The one product that Klingspor Abrasives has that no one else does, and it's been this way, I've been using it now for 20 years, is going to be our PS33. It's labeled as a stearate, but it doesn't have the W and it doesn't have the extra cascading coating on top. Chris, can you tell me a little bit about why the PS33 is so unique?
Well, instead of the stearate coated on top, it's actually impregnated or mixed in with the grain when it's applied to the paper backing. So unlike a traditional disc like the other ones that were shown, where you have your normal grain structure on top of the paper, and then the extra layer of stearate is applied. This is all mixed into the pot and sort of applied at the same time. Makes it a little more unique, and which makes it one of the reasons why this product has been one of the most widely popular abrasives out there for so long. Whether it's old wood magazines or anything like that, anytime there's been tests done for years, this has been one of those discs that's always come out on top.
Overall on top, not one specific medium or test, but overall.
And it's always cool to point out for identification purposes too, is that you can always tell a top coated stearated product in the fact that it's got little white tiger stripes, I like to call them, on the very surface, where with the PS33, you don't see that tiger stripe pattern.
That's right. It'll be disappeared. So if you're a finisher, or if you're in woodworking and you've used water-based finishes and you've heard the rhetoric that, you're not allowed to use stearated abrasives for water-based because it'll cause issues. We have done a lot of testing to make sure of that. The PS33, I've not had any issues with fish eyes or problems with water-based finishing due to the stearate, because the stearate's not on top. Instead, when it's impregnated into the size coat, which we just mentioned earlier, is what holds the grains in place, that means that you're not going to have that shedding to come off onto the workpiece and then have an adverse reaction to water-based finishes later. So now you have opened the door to an abrasive that no one else offers for water-based finishing. And that's really a good key here, especially in states that are really starting to push more for water-based in general, low VOCs. Is there a sandpaper, or is there a type of abrasive disc that I can use to sand in between coats without having to have the stearate? And yes. So the PS33, while it says stearate, because technically it is there, it's not a shedding top coat stearate. And that's the big difference. And the very interesting thing is that, in abrasives, we see a lot of people come out with a new product that catches by storm. People are buying it off the shelves. It's the next greatest thing since sliced bread. One of my favorite stories is that PS33 has been around, as far as I know, 20 years. I've been using it a long time. But back in about 2003, 2004, there was a very famous product that was worldwide accepted. It was called the 33 Buster. And you probably haven't heard of it because it was short-lived, because it was all the hype, but it didn't actually work. And so therefore it was great. It was on the market. People bought it all up, but you haven't heard about it due to the fact that it didn't work. And so the 33 from Klingspor Abrasives has still been the top dog as far as just getting the work done for woodworking, and really no one else has been able to match it.
And for the money, I mean, it really is the best bang for your buck.
Oh yeah.
Would you say you get the most sanding power for your money with this one?
You probably could. And I like to use analogies a lot. So I want to get people to understand kind of what stearate really does. Is I think of it like when you put butter in a pan before you fry up an egg. You put the butter in there to keep the egg from sticking to the pan. That's what stearate does. They put the stearate on there to prevent all the waste material when you're sanding from sticking to the disc. So it gives you just a longer life and a more free disc to be able to continue to sand with.
And as you say that, it brings back to mind, I've heard stearate referred to on numerous occasions as some type of soap.
It's very similar to it. Feel. Ooh, hey. All right. So next we're going to talk about abrasive belt joints. Who wants to take this one?
Yeah.
I'll take this one.
Okay.
All right. So if you order a belt from Klingspor, right off the bat, you're going to get what's called a number 4 joint. A number 4 joint is simply a butt joint where both ends of the abrasive are butted together. And then a very specialized, and I say that, and I'll explain that in a minute, a very specialized tape is added to the backside to hold that joint together. The reason I say it's a very specialized tape is we get question after question after question from people that want to make their own belts and ask if we'll sell the tape. Well, no, it's a very specialized thing. It's actually kept in freezers, and there's all kinds of special treatments that it takes. But it's a very strong, very tough tape that goes on the back of the joint. Then we move to a T joint. We call it a T joint because it's actually a top skive joint. The top skive joint, what happens is sometimes the number 4 joint running through a wide belt machine will cause what we call chatter marks. Okay. And in order to relieve that, in order to get rid of the chatter marks, we will move to a top skive joint in which we top skive, or we remove some of the grain from the surface of the belt to allow for the thickness of the tape on the back side. We call that a top skive joint. We move on next to a number 1 joint, which is mostly seen in paper belts. And what happens is the paper belts are actually, or the ends of the paper belt are actually lapped against each other. There's a slight angle put on there. The 2 pieces are lapped together, ends up with a perfectly flat joint there. And we use that a lot in finishing from like 150 grit on up. And then we move to a number 3 joint. The number 3 joint is one Mike likes to talk about quite a bit, but it's important to note that this was created for the glass industry. And so when you're talking about glass edges, you're talking about really sharp edges. This zigzag joint moves across the sharp edges of that glass without catching and tearing the belt all to pieces, messing up your glass, so on and so forth. You will see this out in the industry a lot with some specific companies that try to market it as a woodworking joint that removes the chatter, but it doesn't. It's still a butt joint, whether it's straight or whether it's zigzag. It's still a butt joint with the tape on the back, so you can get just as much chatter from that as you can from the number 4 joint.
Yep. And so if you're running into chatter and you're anything below 100 grit, I wouldn't worry so much about the chatter, because as you go up finer in the grits, they will be it will remove itself, especially if you look at something like a paper belt in wide belts with the number 1 or the lap joint, or if you look at the number 4 top skive, so the T joint. Either way, they will kind of remove that chatter that happens. Now, one thing to note, though, and this is well worth the money 45 minutes into our presentation, is that if you have arrows on the back of your joint, does that mean you have to run the belt in the direction of the arrows? Leave us a comment below. Let us know what you think about that, as far as, is that the industry standard or is that a myth? Because that's something we're going to cover today. You've done a lot of wide belts, Chris. Anything you want to give for this one?
I've done quite a few, yeah. We'll ask this too. Leave your comment below to what cloth type belt you would think we would use a number 1 joint in. Because there's only one cloth belt that we will make using the number 1. So think about that and maybe leave your comment below on what you think that might be.
Yeah, that'll be well worth every dollar to know whether or not the arrows mean something.
So have we mentioned the fact that there will be a test after this yet?
Not this time around. That's just for the sales reps.
Okay, well,
for our
old habits are hard to break.
We just want to give them the answers. That way they have them. But I'm really interested. This is a personal poll for myself, that I want to find out how many people believe whether or not the arrows matter.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be very interesting.
That's a good point.
So, grit grading system. This one's my favorite due to the fact that I was the guy who made the wrong choice here a long time ago working in the store. And the story goes as this, and I'll tell the story first before I give the explanation. Gentleman comes in looking for wet dry sandpaper, 320 grit. I go to the shelf, I pull off silicon carbide, wet dry, 320, hand it to him. And this is like 1 o'clock on a Sunday. Good to go. That was it. It's all I came in for. No big deal. Well, then I would say, I don't know, maybe 3 o'clock. He's pretty red in the face, and it looks like he's about to punch me. And he brings me what he was using, which was a 320 grit sandpaper, and it was wet dry. But the difference was simply that there was not a P, or the FIPA grade, in front of his abrasive, while the Klingspor abrasives that we had here were FIPA graded. So this, I learned this one the hard way. But what we decided to do was try to figure out a way to explain grit comparison, because there's a lot out there. There's Micron, there is Trizac, which is a 3M product, specific scale that only they use for that one product. And so we had a lot of questions as far as, I'm using, 400 grit sandpaper. I just want to get something similar to it. And yours, always ask, is there a P in front of it? Because it matters. And the reason is that anything, as you see this line here, anything 220 and more coarse, it doesn't really matter if there's a P in front of it. But when you go finer than this line, then the CAMI, which is the United States standard, and the FIPA kind of start to get cattywampus on us. So when a gentleman comes in asking me for 320 grit sandpaper and he hands me CAMI and I give him 320 grit FIPA, I actually set him backwards to more like, 220 basically. I kind of pushed him the other direction. So where he was almost done in the process, I ruined it for him. So that's why he was so mad. When I learned that there's a grit comparison, I found out that really I should have done more like a 600 grit, something along the lines that pushes it a little finer. And usually what I do here is that if you're someone who's using a CAMI and you're looking to buy more sandpaper and you look to Klingspor Abrasives, if you're someone who's using 600 grit CAMI, here's where you have a really good opportunity to fine tune which way you want to go on it. And we'll get into the grit grading in just a second of why they're different. But like, for instance, with the FIPA, you could do 1,000 if you want a little bit more coarse action on your abrasive grit, or you could go 1,200 if you want a little bit finer of a scratch, a little less aggressive of a scratch. So what we try to do is let everyone know that not all of the grit grading systems make a lot of sense for everybody. They're kind of hard to follow. Not a 320 grit is the same across the board. So going to your big box store, you're not going to find that I just need to get 320 and I'm on my way. It doesn't always work out that way. Now, remember, 220 and more coarse, so 24 grit to 220, you're usually safe. There's not going to be any issues there. Anything you gentlemen would like to add? Do you have a horror story like that yourself?
You've got the best story I've heard.
Oh,
so.
thanks. Yeah.
No, just want to know the grit grading system.
Nice.
And this is yet another reason why we ask a lot of questions. Look on the back of your product, and does it have a P in front of the grit?
I know one thing I like to cover here. 4/0 steel wool. Big misconception that it is 600 grit, because if you go to the steel industry, they use CAMI as their grit grading system. So they want to tell you that 600 grit's more like 1,000 in FIPA. In all actuality, on the standard of steel wool, it is 30 microns wide. So the slicing pattern is going to be around 30 microns. And if you look at this chart here, steel wool is more closely related to 360 grit CAMI and more like 500 grit FIPA. So what that means is that I'm one to never recommend steel wool. I will always recommend a non-woven abrasive, because steel wool also doesn't scratch in a consistent straight line. Instead, it kind of just goes wherever it wants to go, because it's like a bunch of knife blades that are just applied to the surface with no backing to tell them which way to go. So and I know if you've got some comments on this, please let me know. As far as a wax application, there's a lot of people that do 4/0 steel wool in between coats. It's not a very consistent application, and you really don't want to use it if you're using water-based finishes, because oils are on the steel wool, so therefore it keeps it from rusting. The downside is you're now transmitting those oils onto your water-based finish, so not a good idea to do that either. Another great reason to use a non-woven. And we have hand pads, 6" by 9". They're 600 grit FIPA, and they're going to be a silicon carbide type of non-woven. Great product. Sorry, had to let you know about that one. That was another tip for you. So this here is how the grits are determined. If it's up to the 220, this is both CAMI and FIPA, that you're going to have basically a screen. It's a sieve, and it shakes it, and the bigger grains stay to the top, your 12 grit. The finer they go, they fall to the bottom, ending at 220, and then there is a bottom splash. Now, where the bottom splash comes into play is what makes FIPA grading system different from CAMI, is that CAMI does this throughout the whole grit range, where they just sift it. And with Klingspor Abrasives being a European manufacturer of abrasives, they have to follow a different suit. And that is basically it's a sedimentation tube. It's like a 1 meter tube long. And however long the sediment takes to get to the bottom is how fine that grit is. And so therefore it is kind of done that way. That's what makes the difference between the CAMI and the FIPA change so much, is that there's a lot more science behind how those finer micro grits will work. I'm going to let you do environmental variables. This one's your favorite.
Right. Yes. So environmental variables. What does it take to properly store coated abrasives? What kind of things affect coated abrasives as you store them or as they're hanging around your shop? Okay. So we start on the top left there. We see the temperature. Of course, the temperature going up and down is going to affect just about anything. Not to mention just coated abrasives. And then we look at humidity. If I had to guess, I'd say this is probably one of the biggest ones is the humidity, especially down here in the South. You know, the humidity gets way up there. Yeah, a lot of times you'll see abrasive discs curl somewhat. You know, the belts don't last as long because they're not kept in the right atmosphere, so on and so forth. Then we look at the dust, okay? Dust gathering on coated abrasives, of course, is going to affect the life of that particular abrasive. And finally, one of the biggest ones is the operator. Chris, I know you've seen it too. We walked into shops from time to time and seen two guys sanding, and they both got a random orbit sander. And one will be over there just sanding away, very light pressure, and the other one will be just bearing down, causing that disc not to spin hardly at all. It's just doing the jigging motion. So what we like to recommend as far as the storage of your coated abrasives is if you've got a environmentally controlled area, say for instance the office. I saw it one of the last trips that I took where they had storage cabinets set up in the offices and in the break room. They kept the discs in the office area and they kept the belts in the break room because they were all environmentally controlled, had the heating and the air conditioning and so on and so forth. And that's going to give your abrasives a much longer life if you're able to do that.
Yeah. Especially if you're using paper discs, because they will certainly curl up and taco really badly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What's the technical term for that?
I know I'm a food guy, so I know it as taco.
Yeah, I don't
AKA
know.
curling.
Yeah, curling, aka tacoing. Yeah, so we get that one a lot, and it's like that's the best way I know to describe it. It looks like a taco. It's still a good disc, by the way. It doesn't mean it's gone bad. It just means that the humidity's gotten to it. So if you're storing your discs and you're finding they're starting to do that right away, maybe find a different storage unit or maybe make it a little shorter so the discs can't taco fully. But we do. Oh, go ahead.
I was saying, if you find your wide belts aren't lasting as long as maybe they do during certain seasons, humidity is one of the things. It's not going to affect the grain, but what it will affect is your joint and the way you store it. Not only how you clean it. If you leave it in the box, and you take it right out of the box and put it on the machine, that's not good either. But how you store it, if it doesn't have a climate controlled area. There's a lot of big shops that actually now built rooms where it's where they can control that humidity level. Temperature is not as crucial as that humidity. Humidity definitely needs to be controlled, and or you're going to find that it will definitely deteriorate the life of your belt joint. And for those wide belt operators, you know how horrible it is to try to pull a shredded belt out from inside your machine. So storage is crucial, especially when you get into the wider belts.
If you're not into a situation where you can, environmentally control where those belts are stored, what we like to recommend then is you just go ahead and keep it in the box 24 hours before you go to put that belt on. Then we recommend you take it out, hang it up on a peg, and we've all seen that, and let that thing hang there for 24 hours and kind of relax back into its natural shape. And by that time, that belt will be ready to be put on the machine. You should be flying.
And your smaller portable belts, those can be stored in those little plastic storage containers. That's a real simple, easy way to store those. And those, you can stack them. You can store them under things, over things. That's a real good way to do it, whether it's in the climate-controlled area or out, at least inside the little concealed containers. At least it will prolong the life of your portable belts, especially the ones that you're not going to be using all the time.
Absolutely. So if you taking advantage of our extravaganza weekend, we have 15% off our abrasive. So that's belts, sheets, discs. If you're going to stock up on our bargain belts, we highly recommend that you keep them in a climate controlled area. Don't hang them on the pegboard in the shop. Don't hang them in the shop wall, on the outside wall in the basement. That moisture and that humidity is what's going to, deteriorate that belt joint. That is the number one enemy to it. So there's your top tip for this session, is that humidity is going to take care of that belt for you before you do. So therefore store it I have belts that are 10 years old that are stored in the bedroom closet. And that's because it's climate controlled. No one ever, gets on the top shelf to do anything with it. So therefore, I have a lot longer life of those than I used to storing them in the basement on an outside wall. They would always break on me, and I couldn't figure out why until I learned that humidity is the number one enemy to joints.
Yeah, most people have a shoe shelf in their closet. Mike's got a belt shelf, so that works out pretty good.
Shoe shelf, she shed, something like that.
Whatever.
So we have a couple of comments here we'll touch on real quick, and that is number one from Hank. He is saying that the arrow matters for belts. It should be in the running direction. Thank you for that on the belts. Brent wanted to say that he has learned a lot of non-woven. He learned to use non-woven a long time ago. Steel wool was tearing up his finish. And then he says, of course, Mike said to use a non-woven, and that has changed my finishing forever. Thank you for that, Brent. Question from Hank. I had to walk away for a minute. You talked about the color of abrasives. What is the Klingspor gold material? I'll let you take this one, Chris.
Go ahead.
That is aluminum oxide. What makes it a little different is in the metal industry, they have different coating that they put on. It's sort of like what styrene is for the wood market, but it's called a multi-bond lubricant. And the multi-bond lubricant for the metal side is to really reduce the heat buildup from abrading metal. And the gold, aka the LS312 J-Flex material, that is actually got a multi-bond lubricant added to it. Most multi-bond lubricants are green in color. That's how you can identify that. But this particular product has the gold colored lubricant added. And it doesn't make it any difference, but you just know when you see Klingspor Gold, the funny thing is they made that for the metal industry, but it is amazing for wood. And if you're using it, you understand why. For wood turners or anywhere where you're doing any kind of really super flexible woodwork where you need super flexibility, that's why we put it on the mops that we sell. Because in the sanding mops and the sanding stars is because it is a fantastic product for that application.
Yeah, and I think it works good in wood because of the high heat. So wood turning, when you get the lathe cranked up and you're trying to put a lot of sanding pressure down to get the bowl sanded down, or sharpening whenever you're doing knives, and then you want to transition to the knife handle to shape it while you're there. And then of course the the sanding stars and the flutter sheets. Reason then is that you can turn them up to a higher speed, so therefore you do have more flexibility and heat retention.
And that's one of the only products that we sell that when you literally fold it in half, you don't get that crease line like you do with paper products or some of the heavier cloth products. So it's an amazing product. Klingspor Gold, in my opinion, is one of my favorite products. We're doing a lot of specialty things in the wood market.
Absolutely. Hank also has another question. What about the belt or the conveyor belt on a drum sander like Jet or Performax? What is the right belt to use?
Well, I mean, it's a matter of opinion. But the most manufacturers they'll make it out of an X-weight cloth or a YX cloth. We do offer a film option for that as an economy entrance, sort of cheap replacement, because it is a less expensive price point to get into that film. But we offer a really good premium cloth that's very similar to what the manufacturer usually puts on there. Some of the real expensive machines may even have a material that's like rubber, but our new premium belts are fantastic. We've done a lot of testing and a lot of working with the consumer to get a really good product out there, and we do have a good premium belt for conveyors available now. You can check that out on the website.
Yep, under the premium conveyor belt. And Hank said he agreed. He got some of the gold out of the bargain bin, and it is fantastic abrasive for wood, especially on the lathe, and that is correct. So if you visit one of our 4 stores in North Carolina, they have 2 Gaylord boxes, huge boxes full of abrasive that we weigh by the pound. So if you want to come in, take a look, and only buy a little bit of this or that, it's weighed by the pound. So if you get 1/10 of a pound, you're charged for 1/10 of a pound. If you want to get 10 pounds, you get 10 pounds. So that's a benefit of stopping into a Klingspor's woodworking shop location in North Carolina, in Asheville, Hickory, Winston-Salem, or Cary, is to check out the bargain bin while you're there and get yourself some abrasive by the pound.
Yeah, see, I personally buy a lot of our shop rolls, but if you're looking for something quick and dirty, that gold is really good. And if you're looking to sample it, you want to try it, a little bit before you invest in a whole pack of sheets or a whole roll. We do offer a gold roll sample kit that's available for like $10, and it's 2-inch by 12-inch strips, and you get one of every grit and range. Fantastic way to try it out. And if you're doing any kind of wood turning, carving, anywhere where you need that flexibility and the ability to follow contours well when you're sanding by hand, give that a try. You can just go on our website and look up gold roll sample, something like that. You should come right up. Check it out. You won't be disappointed.
Yep, absolutely. And it doesn't go bad. So therefore, you can buy it now, save 15%, use it next year. Fine with us. Let me go back to our presentation. We're almost done. So, types of wood grain. So there's 4 different types of wood grain on a surface. Nick, do you want to handle this one? Because I know it's coming next.
Yeah, I know. It's very interesting that as far as woodworking is concerned, we tend to name things for what they are. So we look at the red arrow there. We've got the edge grain. Interesting. It's right on the edge of the board. If we go to the end of the board, what would we call that one, Mike?
I'm going to guess it's end grain.
Man, you are good. Okay. Chris, the little yellow one that goes across the board, what are we going to call that one?
Maybe a cross grain.
Man, these guys are good. Ain't no wonder. Okay, and the face and the surface, we call that the surface of the face grain. So why do we bring that out? Well, for the simple reason that that end grain right there,
yes,
is going to finish totally different than the edge grain or the surface of the face grain. All right. Now, of course, cross grain, we want to try to avoid that if at all possible. And, if you're passing a door through a wide belt machine, you're going to get cross grain scratches. That's all there is to it. It's going to happen. The key to that is to make those light enough to the point to where you can just touch it with a random orbit sander a little bit, take those cross grains out and get your nice finish. But now back to the end grain. That end grain sometimes can be a bear, because if you look at the end grain on, for instance, like one of the chairs that we have in our office, okay, you will see end grain up against edge grain where the two pieces come together. And what you will see is that the end grain finished a whole lot darker than the edge grain did. The reason for that is because wood has like pores in it. If you take a handful of straws, for instance, and you look at the ends of those straws and they're open, you see that, you're basically seeing the pores of the wood. And when that end grain begins to take stain or take finish or whatever the case may be, it's going to take a whole lot more of it to fill up the pores of the wood than what you're going to see in the face grain or the edge grain. So we treat the end grain totally different. What we do is, if you want to try to completely balance those colors out, you want to sand that end grain 2 grits finer than any of the other surfaces. And that should help bring you a whole lot closer to that even finish all the way across.
So you're closing off the end grain so it doesn't accept it. Like if you're staining something, a door is a good one. Chair parts, anything where the two are coming together, sanding it 2 grits finer than whatever you want to stop at the surface will allow it to blend better.
Yeah.
Very good.
Well, and you got to keep in mind that piece of wood, when it was still part of the tree, that was how the top part of the tree got all of its nutrients. It was through those cells or those straw-like structure. So just because that thing's now put into a slab doesn't mean that cell structure is gone.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to be able to seal that off, and the best way is to hit it a grit or 2 higher.
Yep.
So then that brings us to the question of Klingspor Abrasives has a rule of never skipping more than 1 grit in a sequence. So Chris and I get this question a lot, and that is, I'm just looking for 80 grit and 220 grit. So of course, what's your application? Just got a few wood projects that we're sanding, end grain cutting boards, whatever it may be. Usually it's always bare wood. And 80 and 220 are not a great form of just those 2 grits. And here's a good illustration of why. Instead of thinking that abrasives, are cutting into the wood, let's think for a minute that as they cut into the wood, they're leaving behind recesses or areas that they didn't cut. So for instance, the 60 grit that we see on the screen here is going to leave a very deep valley with high ridges. Okay. So you have this big, massive scratch that's been left because that is a much bigger grit than 220 or 120. So then if you were to attack that with 100 grit, you're now lowering those peaks to the original valleys. Okay. So I see the misconception a lot that you want to sand an entire board down with 120, and then, 150, 180. Not always is that necessary. What you're trying to do is actually take the remaining ridges that were left over by the deep 60 grit scratch, and you're trying to lower that 100 grit to meet the original scratch that's there to blend it all together. So then you have 60, you have 100, and you have 150. We skipped 80 and we skipped 120 in this sequence. And those are acceptable because they're only skipping one grit. If you skip too many, what happens is the next picture down, or part of the graphic, where you have these high ridges left over from the 60 grit, but then the 150 grit is only going to be able to attack the very high peaks. Your original scratch from that 60 is still going to be present, no matter how soft it feels. Because a lot of times, when you're sanding, 80 and 220, it feels really soft, like you're done sanding, but really you still have all these recesses, which if you go to add stain, if you go to add a dye, any kind of a pigmented colorant to your workpiece, you're going to see all of those deep 60 grit scratches, because then all the particulates in those stains or dyes are going to collect in the 60 grit scratch. So then it's going to look really bad. It's going to be what they call blotching. It's going to lead to a lot of issues. So a lot of issues we find in finishing really come down to sanding. We know that it's not the most fun activity in woodworking. I mean, after all, you've designed it, you've bid for it, you're starting to build it, you've cut, you've assembled. And by the time you get to the sanding process and the finishing process, you're worn out. Like, you're done with the project. You've gone through 90% of what it took to get here, and now you're just ready to be done with it. So you think you're going to hurry through it, when that's going to cause you a lot more headache in the finishing process, which is why everybody's doesn't like finishing the best. It's their least favorite activity over sanding. So with that said, we have another slide for you, which is the finishing of wood. On this board that we have here, we have sanded 80 all the way across the surface. Okay, so that represents the red line. So from left to right, the entire board was sanded with 80 grit. Then from the blue line, we have 120. So we have just 80 grit on the far left. Then we did 120 all the way down the board. So that's what the blue line represents. Then we have the green line, which is 180. So you have 80, then 80, 120. So the last scratch there is 120. Then you have 180 down the rest of the board, and then you have 400. One of the biggest rules to always remember in woodworking when you're sanding is that when you start to go past 220 grit, you start to burnish the wood, and that's like polishing the wood. Yes, there's actually a fantastic video Nick and I have watched that I think the gentleman went up to 12,000 grit on bare wood. Absolutely polished the wood. It looked like glass. Of course, the downside is that it's maybe not going to always be able to handle the elements at that point. You would definitely don't want to put a wet glass on that. But what this also represents is that I have a lot of people that when we're answering finishing and sanding questions, they stop at 120 grit. They're like, yeah, just do 120 grit, and then I go ahead and stain. But first I got to put on a conditioner, and I've got to do all these extra steps. And just trying to explain that if you went one more grit higher to 180 grit, you would actually not have to do a lot of those conditioners, a lot of the wood finishing products before the stain, due to the fact that they know most people are impatient with sanding. They stop at a coarse grit that they shouldn't. Therefore, they're going to have to add all these other products to it, and you don't have to. If you were to sand one more grit, and in this case 180, you can see where the stain took very evenly, where at your 120 your highlights and lowlights on the grain really show up. But then if we jump to 400, so now we're skipping 2 grits in the sequence. Remember, never skip more than 1 grit. We're actually polishing maple. And this piece, by the way, is maple. And with that 400, now you have the wood's so polished that it won't accept the stain. The stain that you see at 80 grit is as dark as that stain is at 400. But because the wood has been completely polished over and there's no place for the stain to go, you wipe most of it off of the surface. That's the other issue. If you're looking for a deeper stain, you got to find that nice happy medium between 150 and 180. 180 always seems to be, for me anyways, a great finishing grit when it comes down to your abrasives before staining or before applying dye. Now, of course, everyone's application is going to be a little bit different, but for those who don't know, who think that, 80 and 220 is good, let this one kind of, take a look at this one, because this can really change how the finishing is approached. Now, there's a lot of applications where you may want to sand to 400 because you're just looking for a little light color on there. That's fine. I'm not saying that what you're doing is wrong. I'm not saying what anyone's doing is wrong, but if you want it to be easier for you in the end product, this is a great way to do it, is an 80, 120, 180. Most of the time for myself, I start at 100 or 120, kind of give it, see how that grit goes. I really don't use 80 that much because that is a very aggressive grit. The other thing to note here, and I'm sorry guys, I know I'm long-winded on this one, but the other thing to note is that 80 grit is actually 40% larger than 120 grit. So if you don't need to go down to 80, maybe try 100. I feel that 100 is the most underrated grit out there because it's not as aggressive as 80, but it'll get the job done. But it's also a little bit more aggressive than 120. So when you need that little extra boost, 100 grit's a good place to start. If you need to drop it down and go to 80, you can. At least you know. But you're not sitting there trying to make a 120 disc act like an 80 grit either. You can't do that either. I know you have good representation on that, Chris.
Well, story on
Did I lose you? Did you fall asleep on me?
No, I'm just trying to remember what story is on there.
Well, it was the one as far as I'm sorry, it was Nick.
What's that?
The plant that used nothing but 220 grit. They would not use any other grit in the sequence. Everything had to be done with 220.
Yeah. We visited a large cabinet shop, and they wanted us to evaluate their sanding process before finishing and try to see why they were having certain issues. And throughout the process of giving the class and showing the tips and tricks and don't tip your random orbit sander and this and that, we discovered, one of the ladies spoke up and said the only sanding grit we are allowed to use is 220 grit. So they were using 220 grit for everything. And so once this was discovered, the owners of the company didn't know this. Apparently the managers did. The owners found this out. I was actually there 3 weeks ago for another return trip, and they have entire grits throughout the sequence now.
Good.
And
So
their sanding product is much better.
sometimes it's not about just having one disc that'll do the best for everything, but sometimes you have to have, well, they call it a finishing schedule, and that's part of it. Is sanding. So here comes the big question that I had a feeling might be here eventually. Difficult question. A recent YouTube video with a huge test on various brands and abrasive competitor was #1 in longevity, cost, sheet, disc. Any comments? Well, if it's the most recent one, it had absolutely nothing to do with longevity, cost, sheet, or disc. It was all about how many grains were removed. That's it. That was the only test that was really done, but it was presented in a way to make it seem like there were several tests that were involved in that.
And they did cover life a little bit in that, but that goes back to what we started talking about earlier is if aggression and removal is all you're after, then there are certain products that will shine. But if finish is what you're after, those products that are known for removal and aggression are not going to be in the classified area of finish, because the finish is where you're trying to really make that wood minimal scratch or more consistent scratch. Aggression and heavy removal aren't going to get you there.
Yep.
They're great assets when you're looking at anything 120 and below, but anything over 120 and above really needs to be focused more on the finishing side, because as woodworkers, and even in the metal side, that's what we're striving for, is the best finish. So our aggressive side is 100 and below. Our finishing side is typically 120 and above. So you need to really use more than one abrasive if you're looking in that particular range. Is go that route. Anything below 100, go for that aggressive, more plowing application.
Yeah.
Anything above 100, 120 and above, start working on getting that wood fibers more consistent and even, and that way it helps your finish. Less pigtails, less blotchy, less highs and lows, and so that's really the main goal there.
And I think if you're going to, look at something where they're comparing one abrasive against another, you have to kind of keep in mind too that you want to make sure it's comparing apples to apples. Because I've seen some of the tests out there, and they'll compare a paperback coated abrasive with a mesh abrasive, or with a cloth backed abrasive, or even a non-woven. So, you know, if you're going to get a good objective test, you want to make sure it's comparing apples to apples.
And I think that, you know, fine woodworking for years always had one of the better disc comparison or abrasive comparison ones out there. It was all about longevity, overall scratch for the finish scratch, the amount stock removal, they call it. There were so many variables to what made the best disc for general overall use. And so I'm looking at this as far as Chris and I are both really big fans of that YouTube channel. But as abrasive technicians, we found a lot lacking due to the fact that it wasn't actually covered, I guess, in a way that we would do it. And the downside is would we do that? We probably do that with all of our own abrasives. Yeah, we wouldn't do it necessarily against a competitor, because the problem that you run into is that there's competitors out there that have so many material numbers, but they have one name under that particular umbrella of abrasives. So you walk into a box store and you're going to get this particular pro sanding product, for instance, but the material number on the back is actually not the same as the last ones you bought 6 months ago or 3 months ago. And that's the issue, is that you really aren't ever going to be able to compare apples to apples. Now, when they make a product that's a mesh product that doesn't have an actual number to it, now you're throwing out a whole different ball of wax with variables. The mesh discs, we carry ClingNet. That's our mesh material, and it works very well. It's not personally one of my favorite, though, when it comes down to woodworking. I like it better for when you get into solid surface, or you're getting into materials that are fast loading materials that maybe you want to have as much dust collection as possible. A lot of the things that I do are all hardwoods, so I didn't really find it to be more of a benefit with its dust collection having very open grain pattern, but I like paperback for myself. So my recommendation, due to the research and development that I've done, is going to be a paper product on that. The other issue that I find with some competitors out there, especially the one in that video, is that people are paying a premium for a product where they think they're getting less. It costs less by how much is removed. The problem is you only have 30% grain on that disc. You're paying for air and mesh. And I didn't understand that one bit. And that's more on a note that I observed, is that you really are paying for an abrasive that only has 30% grain coverage on it. Are you really paying for your abrasive, or are you paying for air that's in a box? So that was my 2 cents on that one.
I guess you call that a very overcoat.
Yeah, there we go. So in the continuing message, pick the abrasive for the job that you are doing. What is your application, Hank? That is the number one question that we will ask you, because certain abrasives may be better for things than other ones in our own lineup. If you're coming from, you know, if you have a competitor in the shop and you're looking for something comparable, we still aren't going to really look at what you're using now, because in the industry, as far as woodworking goes, we always run into people who are like, oh yeah, this is all I use. And, you know, this is what that's what they were sold on, instead of finding out their application and being told that, you know, really you should be using this instead. You're paying a lot more for a product that's not giving you any better of a performance for your application. So it all depends on the application.
And see, I've always been interested in what other people are using. If you're using their competitor, yeah, I want to know what, but really I want to know why. What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Because that at least gives us some ideas about, okay, so you like the aggression of that product, but you don't like the way it leaves the wood when it comes to finish. So see, that's a question I get a lot in the technical side, is you like because it's aggressive, but it doesn't finish well. And it goes back to what we've been talking about all day, which is that's why we offer products for different applications. So you can switch and make that transition. Same thing in belts. Most people only think, oh, well, I'm using a cloth belt in my light belt machine. Well, if you want a really good finish, Nick brought up the idea about sanding doors earlier. If you want the best absolute finish for sanding door frames, the best way to do that is to swap over from the cloth to a paper in your final grits, especially if you're using a platinum. And so there's a lot of ways that we can help you dial in your process to get you the right product for the application to what is it Klingspor says, Nick? Give you the most
sanding power for your money.
Since 1893, not fly by night, I can tell you that. So I'm going to say this one that Hank says, I don't think he tested ClingNet, did he? Oh, good observation. He picked the apples that made his apples look the best, didn't he? And then Brent says that you have to remember that you're dealing with a bunch of influencers rather than true scientific matter. Yes and no, because there's a lot of people that do research when you're influencing. You're not going to be an influencer just by showing off a product. Good influencers always have some homework to them. And, I'm not saying he didn't. He definitely did. I think it was definite.
He used a robot instead of by hand.
Yeah, that was our first complaint.
That alone gives a lot of credibility to that video.
Yes.
Because too often you'll see tests were done by hand, and that's too going to differ. Even within the same person doing the test, that's going to differ too much. At the end of the day, your hand's tired, you're laying on the sander. So by far,
robot helps.
The premise is very good. The robot, equal pressure, equal this, equal that all makes perfect sense to tie into that scientific application.
Yeah, because the very first video, that was the very first thing we said, was that you can't do it that way necessarily by weight, because everyone's different. So when we come down to environmental variables, and we talked about temperature, and we talked about humidity, dust, and operator is the number one variable, because no two people are the same. Even with all of the same tools, everyone's going to be a little different. In the morning hours, you're feeling much better than you are in the afternoon hours after sanding for 8 hours. So all of that takes into consideration as far as the application goes. So yeah, robot was probably the best addition to that. So there's definitely a lot of scientificness and research that went into it. I mean, pretty much anything that he's done so far, that's why we are fans of the channel, is that there is a lot of science to it. He does a lot of research before he does anything. It was very focused on one aspect of it to make it seem a lot better than it was. So eventually we'll get to that as far as our own products, testing them on all bases, because we're going to run into issues with that particular abrasive that it's not going to finish very well when you go to stain. And so far, I've seen a lot of people showing it off. I don't see a lot of stain projects. Like, that's one thing I'm taking note of as far as a finisher goes, is that I'm not seeing a lot of people staining afterwards or applying dye. But they're talking about it, but usually it's just a natural finish, so you don't see the swirl marks. And that's what I think we're going to get. So thank you for that, Hank. Appreciate that. I was figuring somebody would possibly mention it. Not a big deal, though. Yeah, thanks, Hank. All right, so that was the woodworking portion of the Abrasives 101. So we would like to jump into the metal portion. We have a very nice presentation by Klingspor Abrasives USA technical team, which Nick is a part of. Also, I'd like to go ahead and throw you a little spotlight there, Nick. That TikTok with Klingspor Abrasives USA is every other Wednesday at 3 p.m.
Coming up this Wednesday.
So if you like the format in which you're seeing here, want to see something similar with the handsome man of Nick that he is next to somebody from the technical team every other Wednesday, depending on if you're in town or not, because there's a lot of times where you're traveling.
I'll give you your money later.
Okay. So, yeah, thanks for the check. But yeah, if you want to check out Klingspor Abrasives YouTube channel, LinkedIn, Facebook, all have the Tech Talk that happens every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. But now we're going to take a look at a video from Nick and Landon talking about grinding discs, everything you need to know basically on the metalworking side of things.
Nate here with Klingspor Abrasives.
And I'm Landon Eisenhower.
Today we're going to talk about metalworking with an angle grinder. First things we're going to talk about is our bonded products, which are cutoff wheels and grinding discs.
Also, we're going to talk about flat discs and fiber discs.
So to give you a little bit of history, in 1945, Carl Klingspor invented the high-speed grinding disc. Then 5 years later, invented the high-speed cutoff wheel. So one of the biggest questions we get is, why is a cutoff wheel called a cutoff wheel, and why is a grinding disc called a grinding disc? Well, for cutoff wheels, they're actually used on the edge to cut through. So this part would be the wheel. And for a grinding disc, it's actually used on the face. So that's the biggest differences between what is a cutoff wheel versus what is a grinding disc.
Klingspor originated the SMT in 1971, and that is when they introduced the product as well. So for those of you at home that are not sure what a flap disc is, it is abrasive flaps that are glued radially to a backing. Usually this backing is either going to be plastic or fiberglass. This one happens to be fiberglass. All of these flap discs will be used for heavy stock removal. Usually this is going to be removal of welds, cleaning, deburring, polishing, rust, and scale removal. Klingspor does carry these abrasive flap wheels on two different grain types. The first being Alumina Zirconia, which is seen as the best bang for your buck option. Also, it is great for heavy grinding and also polishing. The second grain type is known as a ceramic. It is more of a premium, so it's going to give you a little bit more aggression, and it's going to give you a little more longevity. So if you're looking for sheer aggression or a longer lasting disc, ceramic will probably be the grain for you.
Here at Klingspor, one of the biggest things that we're proud of is that we're OSA certified, which is the Organization for the Safety of Abrasives. This is an European standard, and to our knowledge is the highest standard of abrasives safety that really anyone offers. So it's such a huge deal, and we take safety very seriously here. Speaking of safety, one thing whenever you're going into using an angle grinder, you want to make sure you have certain safety options. So you want to make sure you have your earplugs, your gloves, your glasses, and a mask. One of the first things that we're going to talk about dealing with cutoff wheels is we're going to go over the vocabulary of what a cutoff wheel really is. So many cutoff wheels out there actually have numbers and letters to go with them, such as like one of ours, which a lot of our other competition actually has these as well, is the A24R. So to let you know, like whenever you look at that, the first letter actually has a big meaning. So A stands for aluminum oxide, the Z stands for zirconia, the K stands for ceramic, and the C stands for silicon carbide. So all of these are used for different applications in many different ways. The next part to it is what we actually will go with the grit. So like for an A24R, the 24 is pretty much the grit that's going into it. So that way you know you're going to have a real good aggression going into it, because usually those are a grinding disc. And then the R would be a bond. So throughout the bond, you've got soft, medium, and hard. So if you're looking at like an M or an N for that last letter, that's really going to be a soft bond, and R is going to be a medium bond, and then your TZs and those are going to be like your very hard bonds. So that's one way to kind of look at it. So whenever you're shopping around and looking for these kind of things, having those key details will help you pick out exactly what you're looking for. All right, so the next part you're going into it, so before you even start cutting, you want to make sure you're picking the correct wheel for that application. So going on to those, for us today, we're actually going to cut on a mild steel. So for this right through here, I've got one of our wheels, which is going to be your A946 Tz. The biggest things to this wheel is that it is an aluminum oxide. The 9, only thing that signifies is that it's special. It's pretty much a 46 grit and it has a Tz, so it has that very hard bond. Whenever we're doing like instruction or trying to teach people how to cut, or if you're looking for the best stability in a cut, you're looking for a little bit thicker, not too thin, but also not too thick so it doesn't slow you down. So we're kind of looking in that middle of the road. So that's where that A946 Tz, our wheel, does a great job, because it's 1/16 in thickness. So with that, you're going to have a good fast speed of cut, and you're also going to have true stability when cutting. So stability means a whole lot, especially for newer people or even so the next thing we're going to talk about is once you actually have your cutoff wheel that you're looking to use, let's check the expiration date. As you can see in this photo, the numbers that are on this label is V012022. This is your expiration date. So V01, what that means, January, and the 2022, that's 2022. So that's when this wheel actually expires. Expiration dates on wheels are very important, because if it's past its expiration date, you do have that worry of it's not as quality as you're looking for, because it has been out for 3 years. So cutoff wheels and grinding discs are actually good for 3 years. And that expiration date that's actually on the wheel is the one that tells you when that thing is expired. All right, so our next step, we're actually going to go into how to properly attach a cutoff wheel to an angle grinder. So if you notice, like I do not have anything plugged in, because that you want to make sure everything is going on safely. All right, so the first thing you want to do is you want to take the locking nut off. So we're going to pull this off. We're going to attach our cutoff wheel that we're going to use. And then we're going to attach the locking nut back to it. You want to make sure the flat side is the one that's going down. So the flat part to it is the one that's going down onto the cutoff wheel. Putting that on. So for this right here, if y'all can see the locking button on the back. So you want to push this in, and then you're going to twist the wheel until you hear it click. Once it's clicked, you're going to take your locking wrench, tighten this down. You want it snug, but not too tight. So you give it a good snugness, and that is how you properly attach a cutoff wheel. So the next thing we're going to look at is making sure the actual workpiece that we're going to be cutting is secure. So I've already done that here. So you want to make sure that it does not bend or anything like this, so that way you have a ability to have a true good cut when you're going into it. So if you look, I have it secured under this and secured by a vise. So having two things going into it's a big deal. The most preferred way to do it is in this picture that was being shown right now, where you have two vices and you're putting in there and you're cutting relatively in the middle. That is the easiest way to do a cut. Most of the time in the real world, we don't have that ability to be able to do that. And so that's the reason why here we're keeping it this way, because this is the way a lot of them are going to be set up. And that way we can kind of cut through this. All right, so the biggest thing whenever going into cutoff wheels is making sure we're doing everything safe and everything proper. So that way we've got the correct stance of what we need to have. So we have an unexperienced operator today that's going to kind of help us out so that way we can do a better training video. So if you don't mind, if you'll take the angle grinder over there and act like you're about to cut. So you're not plugged in or anything right now, just act like you're about to cut that, yes. All right, perfect. So the best way to kind of go about this is, so you're going to turn it up, and then you're going to hold it this way. So as you go into it, if you want to watch me do it one time, the correct way I can, or if you want to go into it, we can definitely do it this way. So coming in, you want to make sure you're here, and do you feel comfortable right now? Because that's the biggest and most important part, is knowing that you're comfortable and making sure that everything's going to flow with you, because if you're not comfortable, then you're going to be shaky. And if you're shaky, then we'll have to worry about cuts. All right, so do you feel comfortable here? All right, so what ends up happening is you see kind of how your angle's going. You want to keep your cut at about a 90-degree angle on top of this. So as you're going into that, just like from the wheel straight, or like from the piece straight up. So the biggest part going into this is making sure we have the correct angle and everything for this cut. So whenever you're cutting something, you need it to be at about a 90-degree. So for me, I put my plant foot first, so that way it's got my stability going this way. And I'm cutting at a 90-degree angle from the piece to the cutoff wheel. So this way everything cuts in straight. So if I'm going up to it, this is how I'm cutting. I'm using my thumb for my trigger, and I'm cutting straight down. At that point, you're just going to let the abrasive do the work, and you're going to let the abrasive cut through it, okay? So right now, as you can see, I have our angle grinder plugged in. Going into this right here, I am using a ultra thin cutoff wheel. This is a 1/16 cutoff wheel. So that way I know I'm going to have the stability going into it, especially whenever I have an unexperienced person coming into it. I'm just going to show me going through it, and then we're going to have her come through it. Here we go. So, I mean, that's really all it takes to kind of go into the safety. If you notice, my foot and everything was going forward. Everything was really nice, and I've got a nice, good, clean cut. So now we're going to have our unexperienced person coming in to give it a cut. Natalie? All right, so make sure you get your plant foot forward. Feel comfortable as you're doing it.
Do I start it before I...
Yes, you always start it before it actually touches the thing. So maybe taking that plant foot and bringing it just a little bit further out and leaning more onto it. And then let's go. All right, so go ahead and start it. All right, let's unplug it for safety. So for whenever she was doing it, you can tell there was still a little bit of nerves going into it, but it's such an easy piece. Starting with smaller pieces is a very great way to start into doing trainings. Just because as we're cutting through these, you know it's going to go quick, and you have a less chance pretty much for the wheel to pop or anything like this. So using a wheel with stability on someone that's new at this is a very great way to go about it. It just helps out. So the biggest thing in going about this is letting the wheel actually do the cutting, because it's going to be the one that's cutting all the way through it. Cool. So now we're going to start talking about grinding disc. Like we had said before, a grinding disc is actually used on the face. So that way you're going to be able to scratch or abrade the workpiece. That's the whole point of a grinding disc, is to scratch or abrade the workpiece and be able to remove welds or whatever it is you're trying to take down. The biggest thing whenever going into this is knowing your vocabulary part. So it's the same kind of vocabulary that we had talked about in the series for cutoff wheels. So we're going down into it. The A stands for aluminum oxide. The Z stands for zirconia. The K stands for ceramic. And the C stands for silicon carbide. The next part to it's going to be a number. So like if we're using an A24R, the number is the grit. So an A24R, that 24 would be that grit. And then the R would be your bond. So an R is a medium. So let's say if it's like an M or an N, that's a softer bond. An R would be a medium, and a TZ would be a hard bond. So that's kind of how those go into it. All right, so making sure we're picking the correct disc for the application. Today we're actually working on some welds with some mild steel. So we're using our A24 Extra. This one right here, it's actually meant for the mild steel. It can be used on stainless steel and a few other things. But this is really kind of going on to that. Our whole point today is really just taking down a few welds. So whenever we're picking these correct wheels, once you have your wheel that you're going to use picked out, make sure you look at the expiration date. So you want to make sure your wheel hasn't expired yet. So looking at this date, it says V012022. So we know that this wheel expires January 2022. You do not want to use a wheel that is past its expiration date because it will no longer be able to work in the same capacity that it should have previously been able to. It's just not as safe. And so keeping up with these expiration dates is very important, and you do not want to use a wheel that has went past its expiration date. So now we're going to have to go over attaching the grinding disc to the angle grinder. If you notice, we are not plugged in. Everything is safe and secure right now. All right, so for these, they have a depressed center, which means it has that raised point going up into it. So your depressed center is what goes down. So make sure that's secured in. So once we have the depressed center facing down, we're going to use our locking nut. We want to make sure we're using the flat side. We're going to attach it to this. So we're going to screw it onto it just a little bit to make sure it gets a little snug and tight. Then there's going to be a button right there, your locking button. You push that in, and then you twist the wheel until you hear it click. Once it's clicked, you take your locking wrench and tighten this up. So all it is, you just want to get it snug. You don't want to put every bit of pressure. You just want it to be snug. All right, so once we have our grinding disc attached to this, we want to make sure that we have our workpiece secure. 2 vices holding this down. So this way we know it's not going to go anywhere, because the safety of this is very important. We do not want this moving. We do not want to have the grinding disc able to move it at all. So having this secure is one of the biggest parts to going into grinding. All right, so whenever we're looking at grinding discs, we want to make sure we're using the correct angles. So if you kind of look at this picture, you can see the improper angle, and then you can see a proper angle beside it. So it really needs to be about a 35-degree angle, but really nobody's there with a protractor to measure it. So a good rule of thumb is to be able to put your fist up under the angle grinder, and that should give you about a 35-degree angle. So that's what's going to help you out when going into grinding these things. All right, Madeline, so to let you know, we are about to do some grinding on these. One big part to this is knowing the pressures of them. Knowing the exact pressures you need to use for that. So you were with us when we talked about using it at a 35-degree angle. I kind of want to show you why. So with everyone's watching, if you don't mind, take your non-dominant hand and lay it out flat. Take your other hand and put it straight down. So you feel a lot of that pressure up in here, correct? So it's not at the point. You don't feel the pressures really as much at the point, correct? All right, so now if I bring your hand straight down and push down, you feel all your pressures kind of here at this part, correct? All right, so if you take it, what you would guesstimate is a 35-degree angle and push in. Where is all that pressure at? Right on the points, right? All right, so that is the reasons why we're going to that, because what it's going to do is using this at a 35-degree angle, you're actually going to be able to hit exactly where you're looking at, and you're going to have all your pressure really focused on the point instead of in different areas of this grinding disc. All right, so you ready to do some grinding? All right, knock it out. All right, so Madeline, if you will, we're going to grab this angle grinder. I want you to fake like you're about to grind onto this, okay? So I'm going to make sure have the correct stance, correct everything going onto it. So we are not plugged in right now. Everything is safe. Just put it on any one of those and get it about that 35-degree angle. All right, so it's a great posture. It's a great way to go into it. So what I want you to do is just move it up and like straight up and down, and then coming back in. So that's kind of where I'm looking at for you when you're grinding. I want it just going up and down. Your amount of pressure that you're putting into it is like pretty much you want the grinding disc to be able to do the work. You do have to add a little bit of pressure, but don't strain into it. Just let it do the work and just push it, okay? All right, so what I'm going to end up doing is if you'll hold it back, I'm going to plug you in and we're going to get it going. So remember for these, the grinding disc you want to start the grinding disc before you actually start working on it. A good way to go about it, do you see these lines right here?
Yeah.
So use that for your navigation point. So when you're holding for that 35-degree angle and you're leaning forward, watch that your center point, and that's going to be exactly where you're grinding at. Okay? All right, so let me safety up and we'll be good.
So I start it and then I put it. It's heavy.
Go for it. That was really good. So one other thing you can do is you see how you're going straight back and forth, which is perfect. So now you can kind of hit these edges. And so as you're doing that, if you want me to, I will show you how I would do that. Yeah. Okay. So anytime we stop, we're going to unplug it. So if you can just lay it flat down on there and then, yep. All right. So if you want to stand here, I'll show you it goes. So if you notice for me, like I am going straight up and down, but if you notice, like I'm turning, but as I turn, I'm still going straight up and down. So that's one way to kind of get these knocked into it. All right, so as you can kind of tell when we're looking at grinding this, the biggest parts to it is comfortability. You want to make sure you feel comfortable when you start to do this. Safety is also the biggest part. And then going into that, making sure we actually have a good stance, proper use, and keeping it about that 35-degree angle. And that's what's going to give you a leg up whenever you're going into grinding to be able to remove welds. One big thing that we notice out in the field, a lot of these people are either pushing way too hard or they're not pushing hard enough. Letting the abrasive do the work is going to be the most important part of grinding, because when you're pushing too hard, the only thing you're doing is you're wearing that wheel away too fast. If you're not pushing hard enough, then it's just not going to be able to grind what you're looking to down. All that pressure really is just your hand pressure and then pushing it back and forward. So you're not really digging too much into it.
Hey guys, so the next thing we're going to talk about today are flat discs, how they're used, and the proper way to mount them. So the first thing, you're going to want your angle grinder. The second piece will be a flat disc of your choice. And the third piece will be the locking nut. So since, as we kind of covered earlier, since the flat disc has a built-in structure, fiberglass or plastic, you do not need any kind of backing plate or anything like that. So first, you're going to want to put the abrasive flat disc over the threading. And then your third piece will be the locking nut. There are two sides of this locking nut, one which has a lip and another that is flat. So when you're grinding with a flat disc, you're going to want to put that flat side down. If you were to put the lip side down, that would create extra space in there and the wheel would turn while you're trying to grind it with it. So just be sure it is down flat. And then you're going to lock the button. You're going to get it started on the threading. And then you're going to get the wrench and get it as tight as you can get it. Once you have the abrasive flat disc on the angle grinder, we do offer these discs in a few different angles. So that'll tell you which angle you need to grind at. So the first disc we offer, it's going to be at a 12-degree angle. The 12-degree, you can think this is a general rule, the higher the angle of the flat disc, the more aggressive it's going to be. The reason being the flaps, or the angled flaps, hone in on a more specific grinding surface area, and they're more aggressive in that little strip of grinding area. The second option we have is going to be a 6-degree angled flap. So a 6 degree is kind of the happy medium. It'll still give you great aggression, all while leaving a good scratch pattern, not too deep where you'll have to buff it out. So 6 degree is really aggressive as well. It's kind of a happy medium. The third option is going to be a flat flap disc. So with the flat, it is considered to be the lesser aggression. Reason being, since it's flat, it does leave a wider, it grinds on a wider surface area. So it's more efficient on large flat surfaces. like removing burrs, removing scale, removing rust, anything on a large flat surface like sheet metal, something like that. The more angles, the more aggression you're going to receive from that flap disc. So as I said, those angles will kind of determine which angle you want to grind at. Since I do have a 6 degree on this flap disc, kind of like the grinding disc, you're going to want to grind at around a 30 to 35 degree angle. And that's going to be the case with a 12 degree flap disc as well. So any angled flap disc, remember to keep that about a 30 to 35 degree angle. And as Danny mentioned earlier, nobody's going to have a protractor, but it is kind of a good general rule to follow. So grinding at a 30 degrees, it's going to get the most out of our disc. It's going to break down properly, and it's just going to work better. If you grind a little too flat, the disc won't break down as well, and you won't get the aggression that you should from one of these Klingspor flap discs. With that being said, if you were to use a flat flap disc, which is more for light deburring, polishing, lighter applications in general, you can drop that angle a little bit. And since it grinds wider anyway as a flat flap disc, you can drop to about a 15 degree angle or so. So with that, you're going to be more efficient with what these flat flaps are made for. So the next thing I want to hit on is how versatile these Klingspor flap discs truly are. So really, we have a great grit structure for these. We offer them anywhere from 24 grit, which is for your heavy grinding applications, your heavy metal removal. And they go all the way up to a 120 grit, which is considered more of a light deburring, any light application, or even into polishing. So we cover all of our bases there. And this is kind of where people like SMTs and flap discs because they're considered a 2-in-1 discs. And what I mean 2-in-1, as opposed to a grinding disc is just strictly for removal, you're going to see a lot of gouges, you're going to see a lot of scratches. These flap discs will be really efficient in removing the weld or metal that you're trying to get out of the way, as well as leaving a good scratch pattern and shine in behind it. So that's the 2-in-1. It's going to be efficient at removing the metal, and it's also going to leave a really good shine and scratch pattern behind it. So really efficient in that aspect. And moving along, we do have metal-specific flat discs depending on the application. So if you see anything green, and that's going to go for a flat disc or a fiber disc, if you see green, it does mean it has a dry lubricant over the top of the abrasive here. And so what that's going to be used for, it's for any heat-sensitive metals, and that's going to be for stainless steel, and it's going to be for any soft metals like aluminum, brass, nickel, whatever the case may be. So in stainless, if it gets heated, stainless steel likes to blue over. So this lubricant keeps the temperature down around 20%. So anytime you can keep a temperature down or keep an abrasive cooler, it's going to make the disc last a little bit longer. So going back to the stainless steel, if you can keep the temperature down, the stainless steel won't blue over quite as much. So without bluing the stainless steel over, you don't add an extra step into the process because you're going to have to buff it or shine that out somehow. Also great on aluminum, because when aluminum gets warm or heated up, instead of bluing over anything, it gets tacky and sticky. And so what that'll do, it'll stick to the abrasive side of your disc and load the disc up. And that'll render the disc pretty much useless because no abrasive will be showing or able to grind. So for Klingspor in particular, we do offer a lubricated disc, flat disc, in lubricated Alumina Zirconia. And we also offer it in the lubricated ceramic. So on our end, the lubricated zirconia does a little bit better on your aluminum and soft metal applications. And the lubricated ceramic does a little bit better on the stainless steel. It's a little more durable, so it holds up to that stainless steel a little bit better. As times go on, flap discs do progress a little bit, and so have we here at Klingspor. So our newest flap disc, which we refer to as the Titan, it's a new up and coming. It is a trimmable backing flap disc. And what I mean by this is as you use a disc, most people, when you're grinding at that 30-degree angle, you're going to use the outside edge of these abrasives. As the disc wears down, it's tougher to get to the center where there's still abrasive. So this abrasive is perfectly good to use. Most people just don't get all the way to it. So as you can trim this backing, you're able to get further down to closer to the arbor, and you're going to be able to use the complete disc. So with that, you're going to get much more longevity out of the disc. And so that's the first big emphasis for the Titan. And it's really convenient. The second big choice, or the second big emphasis, is the built-in 5/8 arbor. So as we kind of discussed the locking nut earlier, with this particular disc, since it has a built-in hub, there's no need for any locking nuts or tools. You just spin it on and you're ready to work. And the third and final selling point for this disc is the fanned arbor. So what this acts, it acts as a cooling feature. It's a vent that air passes through as you're grinding. So as I said previously, anytime you can keep an abrasive cooler, you're going to get a little bit more longevity out of that disc, more bang for your buck. So that's always a good thing. So again, it's trimmable. It has a built-in 5/8 no tools needed. And finally, it has a vented arbor that keeps the disc cooler, and it's going to last longer in return. Okay, so again, before we start grinding, we put the locking, we locked it in tight. We did it as we discussed earlier. It's not plugged in yet, so before we get to grinding, I'm going to discuss. It's going to be a similar stance as when you use the grinding disc. You're going to put your dominant foot forward. And then, as I said, since this is an angled flap disc, you're going to want to run this at about a 30-degree angle or close. And so as you run from there, you can either do shorter grinding areas or you can do the full grind. That's going to be a personal preference up to you. But before we get started there, we're going to turn it on and give it a test. Okay, we're good. And then as you're using it, you might ask yourself how much pressure to use. That's really going to be up to you, what metal you're grinding, and the type of grain. So as you're grinding, you can just kind of adapt and see if you need more pressure or less pressure, and that's something you can see. So we're going to bring Madeline in, and she's going to compare this with the grinding disc she previously used. Probably a little steeper, and then as it going, it'll be a lot smoother than what that last one was. All right, so the third and final grinding method we're going to talk about today is with fiber discs. And so the first thing I want to discuss is the need for a backing pad. So if you buy Klingspor fiber discs, you will need to buy some form of backing pad along with it. So as opposed to the SMT flat disc, which had the built-in structure, plastic or fiberglass, the fiber disc do not. It's just a vulcanized fiber backing. It's not flexible, it's stiff enough, but it can't withstand the aggressive grinding applications. So along with that, you will need to choose from one of the two backing pad options that we carry. So the first one, the economical choice, will be the standard backing pad as we refer to it. It doesn't do anything fancy. It is strictly there as a support system so that the fiber disc does not tear or rip in any way. So again, it's just a hard plastic. It doesn't bend or conform to any corner welds or contours at all. It's just there for support. The second option, which will be, we call it the spiral cool backing pad, is the premium choice. It is just a steel core that is dipped into a rubber outer edge. And so on the edges, the reason a lot of people like this is there is a somewhat of a flex to the edge of it. So if you need to get into that corner weld or a contour, this would be the pad for you. The other reason this is considered the premium is somewhat like the Titan we discussed earlier. It does have a vented arbor, and it has channels, kind of like tread, on the backing pad side. So what that does, air passes through and comes through the arbor, and that's going to keep the abrasive cool. So going back to earlier in the video, if you keep an abrasive cool, it is going to make the disc last a little bit longer. And so these are the two backing pad options. So what we're going to discuss now is how to attach a fiber disc to an angle grinder. So it's going to be the same tools we used earlier. For this video, we're going to use the spiral cool just because it is a little better in my opinion. I like it because it has a threaded center as well. So you're just going to put it on the threading and spin the disc on. From there, you want to get an abrasive fiber disc, abrasive side up, and all of these backing pads do come with a locking nut. So you'll notice this locking nut is flat on the top side, and the threading part reaches down through the center of the fiber disc, is going to connect with the angle grinder threading. So that's going to go down through, you kind of get it started there. And then you're going to get the same wrench back out, going to lock it, and then you're going to tighten the fiber disc into place, maybe. There it goes. You're going to tighten the fiber disc into place. And this is how it looks when it's ready to use. It's going to be backing pad, backside, abrasive fiber disc, and a locking nut on the top side here, and that is it fully locked in. So as for the applications for a fiber disc, it's going to be very similar to those of the grinding disc, which Danny covered, and the SMT flat disc, which I covered just a little bit. So it's going to be a lot of weld removal. It's going to be just heavy fabrication in general. It's going to be rust removal. You could do some polishing, scale removal, all of the above. So any kind of fab shop could use a lot of fiber discs. And so some pros and cons compared to the fiber disc with the flat disc. A lot of people like the fiber disc because it is more aggressive out of the gate. So you're going to get a lot more aggression. Although the disc might not last as long, you're going to get more shear aggression from a fiber disc than a flat disc. Another great is the price point on a fiber disc. Each disc is better economically than that of the SMT flat disc. One drawback, if you're looking for a better finish after you remove a weld, the flat disc would do a 2-in-1. The fiber disc is more scratch and removal, so you're going to see more deep scratches whenever you use a fiber disc. So if you're removing a weld, you might have a follow-up step to polish or get those out. And once again, we do offer a variety of fiber discs as well. So a green one, again, it's going to be lubricated. It's just got the dry coated lubricant over the top. More for your aluminum and soft metals. Your lubricated ceramic, which this happens to be, will be more for your stainless steel. The ceramic grain just holds up to the stainless steel a little bit better. So before we bring Madeline back in to test the fiber disc, we're going to hit on a few of the safety points. We do have it locked in properly, as you saw earlier. It's not yet plugged in. So a few of things. Again, you want to run this at about a 30-degree angle. That doesn't change. And then from there, you want your dominant foot forward stance, so you're slightly over it. Again, you can use the fist rule of thumb as your angle, and then you're going to grind. And so, again, you can alter the pressure as you're going. If you need more, you can put more pressure on the abrasive, or you can put less. So we're going to bring Madeline in, and she's going to give it a test run for us.
All right, so that concludes our series that we're going into. So today we've worked with cutoff wheels, grinding disc, fiber disc, and SMTs. All right, so Madeline, when we were doing the grinding side of things, so we got grinding disc, fiber disc, and SMTs. Which one of these did you like the best?
I like the SMT the best. It was a lot smoother and it was still really aggressive, I felt like.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that is one of the big things to it. So whenever I'm dealing with training and those kind of things, I usually try and push people more toward the SMT. There's a lot of benefits beside it. So for grinding disc, you do have a higher potential to actually gouge material and work its way into it. Whereas for a fiber disc, as Lana had stated, you're actually getting the true aggression right off the bat, but then like it's going to wear its way down. Whereas with an SMT, you get the, it's not as aggressive as a fiber disc, but you do have that consistency that's going into it. Plus, you can actually feel it a lot more whenever you're about to gouge the material. So when she was talking about it being smooth, you can actually feel exactly where you're at on that weld or whatever it is you're working on, and it does help to keep it smooth. So as you can see in that picture that we've got right here, you've got your grinding disc, your SMT, and your fiber disc. Through those right there, you can see where the fiber disc has a lot deeper scratches, but it does look really nice. Whereas the SMT looks like it's more on that finishing side of the scale. And then if you look at the grinding disc, there is a few gouge marks and going into it. That is really just meant for that rough removal. So you can kind of see a full layout of exactly what these wheels are actually used for. So another one of our biggest topics that we had through this series is our cutoff wheels. For us, Klingspor cutoff wheels, the ones we were portraying today were ultra thin cutoff wheels. So we've got those from a 4-inch all the way up to a 9-inch. For the ones that we did today was our A946 Tz. So in that series, we're looking at a 1/16 in thickness, whereas some of our other ones we've got are a 0.045 in thickness. So these are your really thin cutoff wheels to cutting through. So we do offer at Klingspor a wide variety of cutoff wheels just for every kind of application, really to fit the needs of what you're looking for. Not just the needs of the application, but more or less the needs for the user and that application, because the user part is going to be a big influencer on how that cutoff wheel is going to do. Thank you really very much for watching the series, and see you next time.
At all. All right, so that was Danny and Landon with our technical department at Klingspor's Abrasives USA. And so if you have any questions out there, we still have the one going of, do the arrows on the back of the belt matter? And so far our response has been that the arrow matters for belts and should be in the running direction.
Just turn that into a poll and give the answer Saturday.
There you go.
Yeah, so we are a woodworking shop. However, with a lot of stuff going on today, there is a lot of cross medium application going on where a lot of wood and metal is being done, and of course we sell a lot of the flat discs that are the quick change, which is a proprietary product to Klingspor. So if you are interested in even sanding wood with the flat discs, you check those out. It's a simple plate mount to the grinder, and then the discs turn right off. So worth its weight in gold, proprietary product. Check it out. It's a lot easier to use than having to get out that wrench every single time you want to change the disc out.
Absolutely. So what it is that you just tighten up the plate. The plate's on the grinder, and then quick pop off about a quarter turn. And so you can change out discs all day without ever actually having to grab your wrench once.
Quick tip, make sure that plate is on there tight. Tighten it up normal than you would normal disc.
So we have here, okay. So we do have a question. Do we need a special pad to protect the hook and loop on your sander if we use ClingNet? Someone mentioned that a competitor product that you needed the pad to protect the hook and loop on your random orbit sander. So really this question comes back to the ultimate variable out of temperature, humidity, dust, and the operator. If you're an operator who applies a lot of pressure, then you're not going to have that paper or cloth backer to protect your hooks. Then yeah, we would recommend that we have a net protection pad. That's a 6-inch or a 5-inch. That we do recommend using that if you are someone who is going to be heavy-handed with the sander. The thing about having an open net abrasive to where you have abrasive all throughout the actual mesh itself is that, yes, some of the hooks will push through and find their way to that abrasiveness. So if you're heavy-handed, it would be recommended to get an intermediate. Do you need it? Absolutely not. It all depends on your application. Oh, I know one thing so quick thing on sales, since this is the Woodworking Extravaganza, 30% off on all of our books and DVDs. So get yourself a turning book, a CNC machining book, maybe a weekend project book. Who knows? Scroll sign, whatever you want. We have a whole library of books.
A book on books.
A book on books. We have that too. Then, of course, CA glue. We have our own stick fast line of CA glue, and so you can save 10% off on all the accessories. Where we say here we have 15% off abrasive discs, but this is the whole Klingspor Abrasives line is 15% off. So save yourself on shop rolls, on bargain belts, on premium belts, sharpening belts. Let's see, rolls in general. What about drum sander wraps? Did you know that we have cut to fit drum sander wraps? We do for your standard machine sizes, and you can save 15% off of those, as well as jumbo rolls.
Yep, and if you want to save even more money, we've got 15% off the bulk rolls.
You can save a lot of money. And then coming up later this week, we're going to be having Arbortech with a few of their videos on, and Arbortech has select tools that are on sale 10% off until the end of October. So not just the 23rd when the extravaganza ends, but the end of October, you can save 10% on select Arbortech tools. That's really about it for now as far as sales go. We'll cover more on as we get down the road, but we're going to take a quick moment for our advertised sponsor of the hour, that is Bora Products.
The Miterix Angle Duplicator from Bora Tools is the fast and accurate way to find, set, and fit molding and trim work. This simple tool can be quickly set to measure virtually any inside or outside corner. Corners in actual buildings are virtually never exactly 90 degrees. But the exact angle does not need to be known. The Miterix accurately records the physical corner, so knowing the degrees is not necessary. Once the angle is locked into the Miterix, one of the arms is removed, providing an accurate gauge that's exactly 1/2 of the included angle. The saw can now be set to the proper angle using the Miterix as the setup gauge. No math and no wasted stock. Both halves of the joint are cut based on the settings from the Miterix, resulting in a perfect fit even though the actual angle is never known. Homeowner or professional, running trim has never been easier than with the Miterix Angle Duplicator from Bora Tools.
Hi everyone, Rod Bonham here from the Bora product team. Mobility in the shop is a necessity and Bora Tool delivers solutions. Ever need to mobilize something in the shop that's an odd size, like a lathe? Today I want to show you the PM 1100 Mobile Base Kit. Supplied as 4 corner brackets with 2 swivel wheels and 2 fixed wheels, plus all the hardware you'll need, the PM 1100 requires a plywood base platform to complete the assembly and get you on the move. The kit accommodates platforms up to 1 inch thick, and the total capacity of the base is 400 pounds. Choose your material thickness based on the application and the weight of the items you're mobilizing. The platform-based design allows you to accommodate machines or other heavy objects that are wider, longer, or have an odd footprint. You can also make squares or rectangles. The choice is yours. 2 sets of bolts are included to sandwich your base in the frame. One set suits platforms less than 3/4 of an inch, and the other set accommodates platforms greater than 3/4 of an inch. Finish your assembly of the base and mount your machine. You're ready to go. Using your PM 1100 is just as easy. Simply use the metal foot levers to lift or lower your base. Steer your machine away for storage or into position to begin your work. The Bora PM 1100 is a great way to mobilize your shop, whether you need a custom solution or simply need to move your workshop machinery. This kit provides custom sizing, easy assembly, proven Bora lifting mechanism, and metal foot levers. The PM 1100 is a logical addition to your product mix. Add flexibility to your customer shops with mobility solutions from Bora Tool.
The Bora Panel Carrier. Moving sheet material and large pieces of wood is easier than ever with the PM 1850 Panel Carrier from Bora. This shop accessory does double duty. Not only does it reduce the time and effort it takes to move panels, but it also transforms into a table saw feed stand. The support legs kick out, locks into place, and the support arms tilts and locks horizontally, creating a stable feed stand. This means that you can move materials across your shop, run it through the table saw without ever touching the ground. No shop is complete without one of these energy-saving, time-saving, back-saving panel carriers. Easily move 4x8 sheets, holds up to 350 pounds, actual adjustments from 28 to 38 inches. Shop now, woodworkingshop.com, 800-228-0000, Klingspor's Woodworking Shop, Woodworking Extravaganza.
There's a lot of satisfaction in seeing a job well done. And while life offers few guarantees, at least you'll know you're doing it right when you begin work days with Bora. Like everything we design, Speed Horse is made for pros. The unique trigger release means it takes all of 1.6 seconds to set up Speed Horse. And yes, we got seriously carried away with the extras. It's a Bora thing. Our commitment to professional workmanship shows. Once you've experienced our super strong Speed Horse in action, you'll know that Speed Horse is not just any sawhorse. Our customers head into heavy-duty projects with confidence because with Speed Horse, you arrive ready to tackle even the toughest jobs. It's incredibly simple to set up, and when you're ready to call it a day, there's no quicker way than when you ride with Speed Horse. Save time and get more done with Bora Speed Horse.
So if you're looking for any of the Bore tools that are on there, please check our website. If it's not on the website, then go ahead and give us a call at 800-228-0000 and let them know that you would like to special order that product.
Yep, and those are just a few of the tools they offer, and Bore's got quite a few good little gadgets and gizmos that are quite good in the shop. I've got a few of them myself.
Yep, Speed Horse and the miter tool right now are on special order.
What about the motor?
The Portamate?
Yes,
The Portamate should be in stock.
that's a great alternative if you're looking for that brand that no longer makes the one of the number one round based 3 1/4 horse router motors out there. Bore's got a good one, good to replace it. Fits all those inserts and lift systems out there for your router table.
Absolutely. All right. So if you have any questions about abrasives, this is the segment to do it in. We have Nick with us from Klingspor Abrasives United States, part of the global company that is Klingspor Abrasives. And so we're more than happy to answer your technical questions or just general abrasive questions. If you missed the first half of this, please by all means rewind it back and check it out, because it is chock full of just basic abrasive 101 knowledge. There's a lot more that goes on with abrasives, but we figured we wouldn't overdo it because, it could get a little too much.
And Nick said, bring on the hard questions. There's no question too hard for him to answer.
He seems enthusiastic about it now. Well, it's okay. So Chris had mentioned earlier to leave your comment as far as the only cloth product that we make in that number 1 joint. That number 1 joint, remember, is the overlap. So there's no tape applied. Do you have any thoughts on that? Leave your comment below and let us know. Let me also see what we got here. Let's see. Also, not only is Klingspor Abrasives on sale this week during the Woodworking Extravaganza, but also safety products. So safety products that we offer with Klingspor Abrasives, they are going to be 15% off as well. So things that aren't included in that is like our Z mask and the ellipse mask, but everything else like safety glasses and things like that that we carry are included, and gloves. What about 20% off flex cut tools? We do have flex cut tools that are 20% off. So if you're into hand carving or looking to get into it, they have a great starter set that has everything imaginable. I think it's like a 100-piece set. I mean, it's a lot of pieces in there. Get that for someone that good Christmas present, maybe coming around the holidays. Order something now while it's on sale. 20% off, can't beat that. And 10% off most everything else.
And if you're local, you're well known that when you come into the store, you come to the show, you can get your free apples and see the free classes and free demos. Well, obviously we're virtual, but if you're local, still go to the store. They've got the free apples ready for you to dig in. We're giving you free demos here some of the time, free classes here, and we're here to answer any of the questions you have.
Absolutely. Yeah. So during the rest of this week, we're going to have Daryl Dreadnought Workshop, Robert Swarby demonstration. We'll have Morris Schlesinger in. He's going to be demonstrating for you he calls it a good beginner project because it incorporates both spindle turning and bowl turning, making a water ladle, as well as Scott Caskey will be turning a maple burl. So basically from start of the log, where to cut it, to turning it all the way down and sanding it, everything up to finishing it. We'll be covering that later this week as well. We'll have Jeff from the Walnut Log on, showing you advanced finishing techniques for turning. We'll have Built by Stevie on Friday. She's going to be talking about woodworking, women in woodworking. She's the head of the Carpenter movement. I'm trying to think what else. I mean, there's a lot going on here.
If you're into CNC, stay tuned Wednesday. There'll be a lot of stuff going on with that.
That's right.
From software how-tos, how to choose the right machine. And then we're going to try something a little different. We're going to have an actual panel available for asking CNC questions. Anything to do with it, we'll have you covered, from bits to from manufacturing, bits, software, doesn't matter. Chime on in and check that out and see if there's some questions we can answer for you.
And if you're looking for the complete schedule, please check out the woodworkingextravaganza.com. All in there is a calendar, and on that page you can find the week events that are coming up. For instance, tomorrow we'll be joined 9 o'clock first thing in the morning by Sam from Earlex. He'll be showing you everything you need to know about the Earlex sprayers and the compatibility as well as the features that come on that. And then at the 1 o'clock hour, we're going to do a little bit of reverse where Jim from Fuji Spray is live with us, and then I will be demonstrating as he's talking to you. So, you know, I can be in the hot seat, if you will. So Finishing Tuesday is going to be happening tomorrow. We also have Mohawk Finishes. We'll be did a demo video for us explaining a little bit of our hard fill kits, blend all sticks, as well as the my brain went blank, the wood filler they have on the market. So if you're interested in a wood filler, and some of them are really hard to find right now, Mohawk actually has one of the best wood fillers I've ever used, and it's readily available. So stay tuned for that tomorrow. And Chris had mentioned the CNC live panel. So you're going to have Amana Tool, Next Wave, Kyle from Learn Your CNC. There's going to be a lot of people included in this panel to answer your questions, as well as some of the questions they get most frequent. Also, Wednesday morning, we have Jim Sanders. So we have Richard from Jim Industries coming in to talk with us about Jim Sanders and what difference they are being an 11-inch random orbit sander.
Eric could have used that on his table, that's for sure.
Yeah, he could have. Instead of that 6-inch fest tool, he could have used an 11-inch on that slab. So if you're into slab finishing or doing anything with epoxy pours on slab tables, the Jim Sander is definitely something not to miss. Yep. And then let's see. So Turning Thursday, Robert Sorby, Scott Kasky, and then Jeff in the afternoon from the Walnut Log. And then so far in the morning, we've got power carving, King Arthur Tools, Arbor Tech, talking about power carving, what to look forward to. And of course, Saturday, we're looking forward to, maybe we'll do a recap of this whole event, because if you're catching this after the live and you're seeing it, but you have questions, you want them answered live, check us out Saturday. That way you can get your questions answered live about anything that you've seen throughout the whole week. Let's see, the last thing we have left for you is a contour sanding video. Klingspor's Woodworking Shop is known for contour sanders, both through our mini mops, our Mac mops, our spindle mounted Mac mops, our flutter sheets, our sanding stars, and our eyelet stars. If there is a contoured edge of concaves and convexes that you need it sanded, then our contour sanding guide would be a great start for it. We have 7 videos in the series, so this one is just going to give you basically an overview of everything that we have. Chris, you made this video. Is there anything you'd like to include in that?
You know, just when you think you've done it all, then you find another way to use the products, because it's just that versatile. There are so many options we have, just like with other abrasives. There's a right contour sanding product for every application. And I have found, just from using these personally, you know, Mike and I are both woodworkers, so we're not just people who are here talking about products. We are woodworkers. And so we use these products and we talk about a lot. And I'm a huge fan of the contour sanding line, because it's just so versatile and such a time saver and finger saver from having to do a lot of hand sanding.
There you go. All right, so check it out. This is the contour overview of all of the different products we sell for just contour sanding, so you don't have to use your finger in a roll of sandpaper anymore.
In this area, just like we're known for discs and belts, hopefully after today you're going to know us for all the things we have available for contour sanding. Many people cringe at the idea or just run from the thought of having to sand contours. Well, at Klingspor's Woodworking Shop, we want to make that easy. That's why we have so many options available. So today's video, we're going to be part one of a multi-part series on the topic, and we're going to do a brief overview of some of the things we have available. Look for future videos covering the individual items later, and then that'll be more specific to certain applications. So let's dive right in, let's have some fun, and let's get to sanding. So as you can see, there's not a lack of options. Whether you need to make a custom setup using our slotted mandrels, or you still have to do a little hand sanding, take advantage of our flexible roll material. We have this available in our shop roll and our gold roll. And if, well, you're not sure which roll is right for you, check out the sampler pack with a variety of grits in a 2x12 strip. We have our 1, 1.5, and 2-inch mini mop, as well as our eyelet stars for all the very small detailed application. Stepping up, we have our sanding star or our sanding mop. The sanding mops happen to be available independently with a variety of different components to make up the item you need, or you buy a starter kit right out of the gate. Just pick your grit and go, and it gives you everything you need to get started. We also have a 1 and a 2-inch spindle mounted Mac mop for a little heavier applications or wider contour sanding. And then we have a variety of mandrel options to get you started depending on how you need to fit it to your system. So as you can see at Klingspor's Woodworking Shop, when it comes to contour sanding, we've got you covered.
To learn more, visit us at woodworkingshop.com or any of your favorite social media sites. You can also contact us at 800-228-0000 and some.
All righty. So thank you for watching that. We had a question pop up, and that was from Clean Cut Woodworking. His name's also Brent. Mike, what would be the use of having different stiffnesses of actual sanding pads on your random orbit sander or hand sanding base? At which point would you want to use one over the other, and do you offer them? Nick, I'm going to let you take this first from an industrial standpoint.
Well, it's interesting. This should back up to your contour sanding video because that has somewhat to do with it. With a less dense backing pad, something that's more forgiving, that's going to kind of move around some of these light contours and stuff, you're going to want that softer pad. The stiffer ones, the harder ones, you're going to want to sand your flat surfaces with it. And it's really just as simple as that. You've basically, you know, we've talked here a lot about application, and you basically want to match that backing pad up with your application.
Chris, what's your take on it?
I'm with him.
Okay. Yeah, for the most part, the only time I ever say that you need to have a firm pad is if you're doing, like if you have a glue up for a tabletop or butcher block and you really want to level out fast, then having a hard pad for that would make faster work than a soft pad because it won't follow those contours. So same idea to that. So tabletops, things along those lines where you have glue ups is where I like to recommend a hard pad over a medium or a soft pad. Soft pad is better for anything that has more contour to it. You're not so worried about it being completely flat and polished later. If you want to make a piece of glass, as far as your finishing process, you know, if you're doing something with epoxies or something along those lines, then start with the flat, the hard, and then that way all throughout the sanding process up to buffing, everything is going to be, you know, based off of the initial leveling. So that's a very good question, though. And yes, we do offer them. I think it's under Power Tools. Actually, I'll go check real quick. But it should be under Power Tools and then Power Tool Accessories, and then you'll find backing pads. You know, all your big brands, Makita, Bosch, DeWalt, Festool, all of them are going to be in there. We also have some of our house brand ones, which aren't going to be any different in performance. Just we buy them direct instead of buying them through those companies with their name on the package. So it's a little bit more cost savings to you. But all of those are out there on backing pads. You can also just search backing pads on our website and you'll find them that way too.
Yeah, and most manufacturers, they come standard with medium. So medium is the most common one we sell. And then sometimes you'll see them called medium or medium soft or medium hard. Really, medium is the way to go for most applications, and unless you're doing something special. So just look for the medium, and that should be a direct replacement for the OEM.
Yep. But if you have something that has a lot of round contours, best way I know I describe it is like a auto body. Whenever you're doing something with a fender or a long tapered curve, that's when the soft or the extra soft really come into play, because they'll be able to contour that yet still keep the sanding flat without making it flat. And that's kind of a tough one to say, but yeah, that's what I'd recommend it.
And there too, we have some foam sanding products that kind of fit right into that whole setup. You know, we've got some of the stiffer foam sanding products, great for flat surfaces. We've got some of the real half-inch thick sanding products that you can really squeeze in super easy, and they fit those contours just wonderful. And some of them are machine based too. They've got the hook and loop system on them, and you can use them on the various machines.
And may even have just a rare occasion where you need a really super soft, and that's where we offer those interface pads. So you can use a standard medium backing pad and just slap a half-inch or a 1-inch interface on there to do whatever necessary contours you need to sand, and then pop that off and you're right back to sanding traditionally, you know, with the normal backing pad.
Yeah. And then if you're sanding something where you have to have a disc on it, like a hand sanding application, it's always nice to have a little bit of foam to save your fingers, to also allow for even pressure. Because if you think about it, if you were sanding with your hand, you had 3 fingers, these are your 3 points of actual pressure. So therefore, usually when you sand with those, you're going to get loading just where the finger pressure is. So having a foam backer pad is what's going to help in doing that as well. More even pressure across the entire surface of the abrasive. Well, gentlemen, I think it's been a fun afternoon. Please join us again tomorrow, 9 a.m., where we have Sam from EarlXN. But don't forget, all this week, you're going to be saving 10% on select Arbortech, 15% off Klingspor Abrasives. That is discs, sheets, rolls, belts, wraps, flap discs. I could go on all day, but that would take too long. 10% off CA glues and 30% off books and DVDs. So make sure you check that out. And also the top of the hour item is going to be the quick change discs on our website, the CMTs. Make sure you check those out. If you're having an abrasive application where you're using a lot of flap discs and changing grits quite frequently to make graining, that is a great alternative and proprietary Klingspor only.
Yep, and the website is full of so many more deals that we didn't mention. We'll let you to the treasure hunt. You go out there, browse the website, you find the treasure that most suits your needs and where you are right now, and just you reap the rewards of our being willing to give them away.
Absolutely. All right, thank you again, Clean Cut Woodworking. Thank you for all the information. You're killing it, except for Mike. He's over there. So I appreciate you, Brent. Always a pleasure helping you out in any way we can. So, by the way, when you call in to 800-228-0000 or woodworkingshop.com and you have an abrasive question, we're the faces that you're going to see whenever you come to it. So if you enjoy what you're seeing here and you do have a question, you can ask it, leave a comment below, give us a call Monday through Friday. We'll be happy to answer your question as well. So anytime now watching this or down the road, if you have a question, don't hesitate to reach out. There are no stupid questions, just improper applications.
You might get some stupid answers.
Depends on the day. We're woodworkers. We do this as well in our free time as much as we do at work. So we're always in it. And so, yeah, we have a bit of fun with it. We're never going to be mean to you about it. We'll never belittle you. We'll always make sure that you understand what we're talking about. And at the same time, we'll have some fun with you once we get to know you and get your personalities down.
But you will be abrasive about it, though.
We are always abrasive and proud of it.
Sometimes we're a little rough.
And on that note, I am Mike Z, Marketing and Technical Specialist for Klingspor's Woodworking Shop.
I'm Chris. And this is partner here with Nick from Klingspor. I guess we will see you guys in the morning at 9 a.m.
Have a good one. Thanks.